Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Parallel Deku. Back with another fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Was Raised by Aizawa and Present Mike. Now before starting, please give this video a like. And subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. It was already dim outside. As the cold night wind blew, two figures could be seen on the sidewalk, a mother and her child. Normally, no one would be out in the winter chill, but this family had just left a movie theater after watching a hero film. Since Inko discovered that her son Izuku was quirkless a few months ago, she had made it her mission to keep his spirits high, knowing how those without quirks were often looked down upon. She showed her love in many ways, from playing with him and cooking his favorite katsudon to supporting his passion for heroes. Every time a new hero movie was released, they would go see it together. Inko cherished the sight of her child smiling and beaming with happiness, despite the weight of his lost dreams. The movie had ended around 8 in the evening, and they were now walking to the train station to return home. Suddenly, chaos erupted as a villain attack unfolded nearby. The scene was too fast for the little boy to comprehend, filled with panic. The villain was trying to evade Endeavor, who was closing in on them. Instead of caring for the two green-haired figures in his path, Endeavor shot flames at the villain behind them. Inko quickly ducked, hugging her son tightly, relieved that they had not been harmed. Realizing they needed to escape, Inko decided to run as fast as she could. However, before she could get far, the villain captured her, taking her hostage. She urged Izuku to run, and he fled, his heart racing as he distanced himself from the scene. A few minutes later, he found an alley to hide in, exhausted and shivering. He pulled his slightly oversized winter sweater over his head, trying to shield himself from the cold. Eventually, fatigue overcame him, and he fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. In a nearby area, Aizawa, known as Eraserhead, was patrolling the streets. It was almost 9, and unable to sleep, he decided to check the area. After saying goodbye to his cat, he swung from rooftop to rooftop, navigating the slippery surfaces of winter. Soon, he spotted Endeavor and the police managing the aftermath of the villain incident. What he saw next filled him with dread. Inko? He approached Tsukachi, asking what had happened. Tsukachi explained that the villain, burned by Endeavor, had taken Inko hostage and, tragically, had killed her before Endeavor could intervene. Aizawa felt a heavy sigh escape him as he processed the news. Who was the woman? He asked, his voice strained. Her name is Izuku Midoriya, Tsukachi replied, knowing how much Aizawa cared for her. It had been 5 years since he last saw her, and now this was how they met again? Aizawa stood in silence as officials took her covered body away, leaving him with a sense of loss. Just a few blocks away, he heard a child crying. Following the sound, he found a small boy in an alley, sobbing quietly. Not wanting to frighten him, Aizawa approached cautiously. The child, weary and cold, tried to hide in his oversized sweater, his eyes fluttering as he fought to stay awake. Eventually, he succumbed to sleep, snoring softly. Aizawa noticed the boy was shivering and had a light burn mark on his left hand. Gently, he picked the child up, wrapping his capture scarf around him to provide warmth. As he examined the boy more closely, he noticed the green and black hair, messy just like his own. The resemblance to Inko struck him, and a realization dawned on him. Could it be? Are you Izuku? I let the doctor check on Izuku while I waited in the waiting room. I had just finished talking to Tsukachi, who said he was on his way. Now, I was trying to reach Hisashi and he finally answered. Hisashi's voice was lively as he greeted me, but I replied in a tired tone, letting him know I would be home late. Concern replaced his excitement as he asked if everything was all right. I assured him that things were fine and requested he inform Nizu that I was taking a break from teaching. After he agreed, I hung up. Tsukachi arrived just in time, bringing the files I had requested. He informed me about Izuku and his family. The boy's name was indeed Izuku Midoriya, the son of Inko, the woman from the incident. His father, Hisashi Midoriya, had a fire-breathing quirk but was nowhere to be found. There were no other relatives listed, and Izuku was diagnosed as quirkless since his quirk had yet to manifest, although records indicated it could appear before he turned 6. That was all the information available, and I felt a strong resolve to take care of him. Without hesitation, I stated my intention to adopt him. Tsukachi looked at me in surprise, but I explained that I couldn't leave him in the system. The detective nodded and offered to prepare the necessary papers, letting me know I was his foster guardian until the adoption was finalized. After a few more minutes, the doctor approached and asked me to follow him to Izuku's room. He explained that the light burn would heal in a few days with the application of burn cream. Although it would have been better if Recovery Girl were available, he assured me that Izuku had received medicine for a cold and fever due to exhaustion, and he would be fine. The doctor finished by saying I could stay if I wanted. I called Hisashi again to ask him to bring my clothes and sleeping bag, instructing him to be quiet upon arrival. An hour later, I fell asleep, but I was stirred by the sound of the door opening. It was Hisashi, who peeked in to confirm he was in the right room. He wore a denim jacket over a white rock and roll shirt and had his hair tied back in a low ponytail. I walked over to him and expressed my gratitude, asking him to keep an eye on Izuku without waking him, promising to explain everything later. After changing into a black sweater and jeans, I hurried back to Izuku's hospital room and sat next to Hisashi at the end of the bed. Hisashi looked at me and stated that he was adopting the kid. His expression was one of shock, and after a moment of processing, he asked if there was a special reason. I sighed and shared the news that Inko had passed away that day. Hisashi was taken aback. He knew that Inko and I had remained friends after our breakup. We had both agreed it was for the best. I had started to be attracted to guys, and Inko was trapped in an arranged marriage. A few months later, she married, and the following year, she introduced Izuku to me. Now, seeing the boy here, I felt a deep sadness for my friend. I looked at Hisashi to respond, but he had already fallen asleep, so I let him be and closed my eyes, waiting for morning. It was early in the morning when I found myself drinking coffee beside Izuku's hospital bed while Hisashi prepared to leave for his patrol. After a while, Izuku began to stir, tears flowing as he pressed his hands against his head. It was clear he was in discomfort. I sighed as he looked at me with half-closed eyes, his emerald gaze reminiscent of Inko's. He attempted to hide under the blanket, but his hair fluffed out, making it obvious he was trying to conceal himself. I greeted him, and he peeked out to look at me. I asked if he had a headache, and he nodded. I confirmed that he also had a fever. We exchanged glances for a few moments before I introduced myself, but he interrupted me, recognizing me as Eraserhead. His voice was weak but held a hint of excitement. I was surprised he knew who I was. I was an underground hero, not widely known among kids. Curious, I asked how he knew me, and he shyly admitted to being a fan of heroes. I decided to change the subject and called for the doctor. When I returned with the doctor, Izuku was playing with the sheets and pillows. The doctor greeted him and checked his temperature. After examining him, the doctor confirmed that his fever had subsided and that his headache was likely due to stress. He was ready to go home as long as he had proper care. I informed the doctor that I would be taking him home, eager to leave the suffocating atmosphere of the hospital. Once the doctor left, I found myself alone with Izuku. Unsure of what to say, we sat in silence until he asked me if I knew what had happened to his mother. My expression turned somber as I struggled with how to explain her death in a villain incident to a child. I couldn't bring myself to say anything. Looking at Mr. Zua, Izuku realized that his mother had died in the incident the previous night. Having watched many hero movies, he understood what had happened, and despite his efforts to hold back the tears, they slowly streamed down his freckled cheeks. He looked up at Zawa and asked who would take care of him now. Zawa's expression shifted to one of surprise, but Izuku knew he understood the situation. Zawa wiped away Izuku's tears and assured him that he would adopt him soon. The thought of staying with Zawa brought a sense of ease and safety to Izuku. He nodded and hugged Zawa's sweater, unable to give a full embrace, but Zawa returned the gesture. A week later, Zawa had been taking care of Izuku, with help from Present Mike, which made things easier. Izuku was a joy to look after. He loved heroes, Katsudon, the color red, and had a knack for analyzing things. Zawa noticed how Izuku mumbled to himself while watching new hero shows and movies. He had already signed the adoption papers, making him Izuku's legal parent. Zawa had just started teaching at UA this year, and he wasn't quite sure how Mike had convinced him to take the job, as he wasn't particularly fond of children. However, he found a few exceptions, including Izuku. Since Zawa didn't trust babysitters and Mike had his own class to teach, he decided to bring Izuku along. Packing a backpack full of essentials for Izuku, including snacks, extra clothes, a water bottle, some hero toys, and a notebook, Zawa informed Nizu about his situation. The principal, a bear-like creature, agreed to let Izuku accompany him to UA. The drive to UA was short, and Zawa quickly got Izuku out of the back seat, lifting him along with the backpack. Carrying Izuku, he couldn't help but smirk at the child's excitement. UA was clearly Izuku's dream school, and Zawa resolved to train him to be a hero, regardless of his lack of a quirk. As they walked through the halls, Zawa was relieved to see that there were fewer students since they had arrived early. They soon reached the faculty room, where Zawa opened the door for them. The teachers looked on in shock and confusion. Zawa, in his usual monotone voice, asked what was wrong. Namuri, the pro-hero known as Midnight, rushed over and scooped Izuku into her arms. Zawa pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling overwhelmed. He took a seat, allowing Namuri to play with Izuku, who seemed to enjoy her company. Hisashi, another teacher, introduced Izuku to the others, and Zawa sighed in resignation. Midnight began sharing stories about her experiences and quirks, and suddenly, Izuku's eyes widened as he remembered something. He dashed over to Zawa, asking for his notebook. Zawa retrieved it from the bag, ignoring the gasps of the other teachers. Once Izuku had the notebook, he thanked Zawa and returned to Namuri. The teachers were taken aback when they heard Izuku call Zawa Dad. Zawa felt a headache coming on but managed to smile slightly. He suggested that Izuku interview the heroes while waiting, a grin creeping onto his face, hidden by his scarf. A few minutes later, the bell rang, signaling that Zawa had to return to his class. He told Izuku to wait for him, and Izuku nodded, already engrossed in conversation with Cementos. Izuku was thrilled to learn that he would be seeing more of the heroes, especially Midnight, who introduced herself as Auntie Namuri. After interviewing the heroes about their quirks, he rushed over to Zashi, eager to show him his notes. Zashi knelt down to Izuku's level and praised him for being so smart. Izuku wanted to show Zawa his notebook, and Zashi carried him through the halls. When they reached the classroom door, Zashi opened it to reveal Zawa standing behind a podium in front of the class. A smile spread across Izuku's face as he jumped out of Zashi's arms, landing on his knees and earning a small bruise. Zawa's expression turned to one of concern, but Izuku was too excited to care. He quickly got up and ran to Zawa, proudly flaunting his hero notebook. Zashi left, and Izuku called out to Zawa, eager to share his notes. The students were astonished to learn that Zawa had a son, expressing their surprise and disbelief. Zawa introduced Izuku to the class, lifting him up as he did so. The students cooed at Izuku's cuteness, and Zawa smiled proudly. After finishing the announcements, Zawa suggested that the students learn from Izuku while he took a moment to rest. He warned them that if Izuku cried, they would have to answer to him, leaving the students puzzled about what that meant. Zawa then turned his attention back to Izuku, mentioning that Nizu would be proud of him. Izuku tilted his head in confusion, not knowing who Nizu was. Zawa sat down against the wall, resting on the floor, while Izuku excitedly approached the students to learn about their quirks. He interviewed each of them, eager to gather as much information as possible. One student asked if Aizawa wanted them to analyze quirks, to which Izuku shrugged, unaware of any specific objectives. He simply thought that Zawa was tired and letting him play with the students. As Zawa prepared to leave, he took Izuku to a kind senior who gently kissed his forehead and healed his bruise. She asked to be called Nana Chiyo, or simply Nana. Time passed, and most of my hours were spent in the teacher's lounge, where I ate, played with toys, slept, wrote in my notebook, and drew heroes. The final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. Once most students had left, Zawa carried me to an office. Inside the office was a peculiar creature that resembled a mix of a mouse, bear, and dog. My closest guess was a hamster with a mouse tail and bear ears. Aizawa greeted the principal, Nizu, with a slight bow. Nizu had taught in his class back when he was in high school. This is Izuku Aizawa. You said you wanted to meet him, Zawa said, and Nizu nodded in acknowledgement. He noticed a notebook belonging to Izuku that had been saved from an incident. It was a hero analysis notebook. The writing was messy, but if one took the time to read it, it was surprisingly accurate and made sense. Nizu seemed curious about Izuku. Aizawa, after watching from the CCTVs, I've grown fond of the child. I want to offer you something to make things easier. How about I teach Izuku exclusively while you work? Nizu suggested. Aizawa considered the offer. It would alleviate his worries about finding a school for Izuku and dropping him off and picking him up. He wouldn't have to worry about Izuku being somewhere he couldn't protect him. Plus, it seemed they got along well intellectually. Sure, he agreed in his usual monotone voice. I'll bring him every day from now on. Nizu wore an excited grin, which made Aizawa sigh. You can go now. Call me Uncle Nizu Izuku, he said, waving goodbye with his paws as they exited. Nizu had plans for the child. He recognized Izuku's intelligence and kindness and decided to raise him to be a good and strong hero. Even though Izuku was currently labeled quirkless, Nizu knew he would have to work twice as hard as others to achieve his dream of becoming a hero. The next day, while tutoring Izuku, Aizawa felt pleased with his progress. Izuku was a fast learner, and if he continued at this pace, he could start high school work by the next year. He took short breaks, and Aizawa assigned him an hour to train his analytical skills by watching hero fights and writing in his notebook. It was encouraging to see his eagerness for knowledge. Weeks passed since Nizu began teaching Izuku. Lessons took place every weekday, and on weekends, Aizawa allowed him to play at a nearby playground. There, he made a friend named Shoto, though he wasn't sure of Shoto's last name. Every weekend they played and talked. Shoto had unique hair, white on one side and crimson red on the other, cut exactly in half. He also possessed cool quirks, ice on the right and fire on the left, but he was reluctant to use his left side. Izuku wanted to discuss it with him but didn't want to pry, especially since he was still getting to know his new friend. Unlike his old friends, Shoto accepted him being quirkless. A year passed, and Izuku was now 5 years old. Nizu had given him a break from lessons, and they were now working on high school level subjects. His analytical skills had improved. During his break, he was in the teacher's lounge with Auntie Namuri and Zashi. He learned that Zashi was Zawa's husband, which meant he had 2 dads. He decided to call Zashi Papa, while continuing to refer to Zawa as Dad. Izuku settled into his usual spot on the sofa, playing with his hero action figures. His eyes had been irritated for days, but Papa advised him not to scratch them, which made it difficult to resist. Today, Pro-Hero Endeavor was visiting UA with his son, and Izuku was excited because the teachers mentioned that Endeavor's son was his age. Perhaps he could befriend him. A few minutes later, they heard a knock on the door. Endeavor entered, flames flickering around him in a proud manner, with a child standing behind his leg. As Izuku approached to see the new face, he was surprised to find it was Shoto. Aizawa, what are you doing here? The half-and-half boy asked. This is almost like where I live. Why are you here? Izuku tilted his head in curiosity. Endeavor's my father, Shoto replied. Do you have any business with my son? Endeavor asked, his tone calm but carrying an intimidating presence that made Izuku feel uneasy. Before Izuku could respond, Shoto spoke up. He's my friend, Dad, he said in his usual monotone voice. Endeavor cast a glare at Izuku, prompting him to run to Zashi's work area to hide. After Endeavor and some teachers finished their conversation, Cementos announced they were heading to the training field. Izuku realized he wouldn't have anyone to stay with him there, so he joined them. Shoto walked beside him, and they began discussing random topics. Have you been crying, Izuku? Shoto asked with a hint of concern. No, my eyes are just irritated lately, and I feel sleepier than usual, Izuku replied, trying to reassure him. Izuku? Aren't you going to cut your hair? Shoto questioned, glancing at the length of Izuku's hair, which reached halfway down his neck. I want my hair to be like Zawa's, though, Izuku said. Shoto chuckled and remarked, I think you'd look better with shorter hair. It looks messy on you. Izuku pouted at the comment, but they both laughed it off. They stopped when they reached the training field, where most students greeted Izuku, and he returned their smiles. He and Shoto stood next to Papa. Auntie Namuri began speaking, but suddenly, Izuku's vision blurred, and everything turned gray. He noticed a white border forming a circle around him, and Zashi appeared red as he moved inside the circle with Izuku. Present Mike, also known as Hizashi, addressed the students. Okay, students, you will all be going up against Endeavor. Don't worry about the flames, he'll use safe flames to ensure you won't get burned. The students looked relieved at the reassurance. But listen everyone, you have to wear these sensors. They will determine how well you perform against Endeavor. Hizashi said, his voice shifting from excitement to seriousness. He turned to Shota, who seemed surprised, and then felt a thud against his leg. It was Izuku. Shota rushed to carry the unconscious Izuku. He informed Midnight and Hizashi that they would take Izuku to Recovery Girl and asked them to continue the training without them. As he hurried away, he noticed the concerned expressions on the students' faces. Before he could leave, he was stopped by Shoto Todoroki, who seemed worried about Izuku. Shoto asked if Izuku would be okay, his voice a mix of monotone and concern. Shota smiled reassuringly and assured him that Izuku would be fine before continuing to Recovery Girl's office. From Shota's perspective, he had been observing his students getting energized by Midnight's speech when he noticed a sudden red light. He was the only one who seemed to see it. Following the light, he found Izuku with glowing red pupils and hair that was levitating. He realized that Zashi's quirk had worn out, and when Izuku looked at him, it was clear he was frustrated that Shota had erased his quirk. Shota shrugged, indicating he hadn't done anything intentionally. Moments later, Izuku passed out. Fatherly instincts kicked in, and Shota rushed to carry the child. He nodded at Zashi, who understood, and they hurried to the clinic for Recovery Girl to examine Izuku. Once there, Shota laid Izuku down and explained what had happened as Hizashi entered the room. His mind was racing with thoughts about the earlier incident. He had a theory about Izuku's quirk, but he needed to wait for him to wake up to investigate further. An hour later, Izuku began to stir in the bed, opening his eyes briefly before closing them again, tears forming. He expressed discomfort, saying it hurt. Shota pulled the 5-year-old into a comforting hug and requested eye drops from Recovery Girl, assuring Izuku that the drops would help alleviate the pain. After applying the eye drops, Izuku adjusted to the light and looked at Shota. Recovery Girl announced that she would call a friend who specialized in quirks to check on Izuku. Zashi asked if Izuku was alright, and the child nodded, declaring that he was fine. His mood shifted from tired and stressed to excited and bright as he exclaimed that he had a quirk like his father's and like Shota's. Shota felt a wave of relief wash over him, knowing that Izuku was okay. Shota then asked Izuku if it would be alright to test his quirk and explain what happened during its activation. Izuku nodded with determination. After classes concluded, Shota walked Izuku to Nizu's office to gain a better understanding of the situation. Nizu welcomed them, and despite seeing him daily, Izuku was excited to greet his teacher. Nizu reminded him to call him Uncle Nizu outside of lessons, which made Izuku giggle. Shota expressed gratitude to Nizu for meeting with them and explained that Izuku had developed his quirk. Nizu, having witnessed the earlier incident, suggested that Izuku demonstrate his quirk on him to clarify its nature. Izuku focused intently, and his eyes flashed red, surprising the teachers present. Nizu began to act strangely, growling like an animal, but once Izuku cancelled his quirk, Nizu composed himself and remarked that it seemed to work on mutant types as well, as if nothing had happened. The other teachers checked on Nizu, who assured them he was fine while sipping his tea. Shota, still in disbelief, called for Izuku to try his quirk on ectoplasm. Izuku flinched at the sudden shout but complied, though he was unable to activate his quirk. Shota decided to take Izuku back to Recovery Girl's clinic, asking her to cancel her friend's visit since they would go to the hospital instead. However, she shook her head and informed him that her friend was already there. When Shota turned around, he saw two doctors. One introduced herself as Mika, a quirk specialist, and the other as Jean, whose quirk revolved around DNA. Jin examined both Shota and Izuku, his eyes glowing green as he assessed them. After a few moments, he confirmed that Izuku was indeed Shota's biological son. Shota felt a rush of happiness, realizing he had a son with Inko. The earlier frustration faded as he embraced Izuku, apologizing for his earlier outburst. Recovery Girl commented that this was a positive development. Dr. Mika then knelt down to Izuku's height, ready to check his quirk. After conducting several tests, she explained how Izuku's quirk worked. She informed Shota that Izuku's quirk was an evolved version of his own, capable of erasing mutant quirks as well. She elaborated that there were two primary ways to activate it. Shota, confused, asked for clarification. Mika explained that the first way was to look directly at the person, similar to Shota's quirk. The second way involved controlling a radius around him, where anyone within that area would have their quirks erased. Currently, the radius was 0.5 meter but could expand further with training. The potential third option was through touch, which was only possible with extensive quirk training and practice. The realization left me in shock. How could my quirk evolve into something so powerful? I had so many questions, but I let her continue. She explained that the drawbacks included drowsiness, and if overused, dry eyes could occur, but that could be mitigated through endurance training. I nodded at every piece of information she provided. There was so much to understand that it took a while. Izuku had fallen asleep somewhere in the middle of our conversation, likely due to the tests he had undergone. He needed to use his quirk on them, and the drowsiness was a known drawback. When we finished, they spoke with Recovery Girl for a few minutes while I stayed by Izuku's side, taking my time to look at him, knowing he was my son. Dr. Mika remembered one last detail before leaving with Dr. Jin. His quirk had arrived late because it somehow blocked its own manifestation while forming. I checked the time and realized Zashi was probably waiting. I turned to Recovery Girl and suggested we should go, not wanting to keep my husband waiting. She handed me some gummies, instructing me to give them to Izuku when he woke up, reminding me to tell him they were from Nanny Chio, starting with a friendly smile and ending with a more demanding tone. I left, carrying Izuku on my back with the support of my capture scarf, the files about his quirk from Dr. Mika in one hand, and the gummies from Recovery Girl in the other. Once I placed Izuku in the back seat of the car, I took the passenger seat next to Zashi, who started driving. He asked if Izuku was all right, noticing my happiness. I assured him I would tell him all about it. Zash seemed excited, thinking it must be something good since I was willing to share everything. I mentioned we needed to go to the legal office soon, wanting to expedite the process. Zashi tilted his head, confused, and I reminded him about the road. He quickly focused back on driving, chuckling softly at his mistake. I sighed, sharing the news that we had a DNA test confirming Izuku was my biological son. Zashi's excitement was palpable as he shouted in joy, causing a slight pain in my head, but I was too happy to care. I explained that Izuku's quirk was the same as mine, only evolved, and with it, he would make a great hero. The following week, while Shota taught his classes, Izuku was learning hero basics in Nizu's office. Their lessons were shorter this time as Nizu wanted ectoplasm to help Izuku gain at least some control over his quirk, allowing him some time for an afternoon nap. They went to Gym Gamma, commonly known as Training Kitchen Land. Ectoplasm created copies of himself while keeping his original body far from Izuku. The goal was for Izuku to disable the copies by expanding his awareness or focusing on them. Aizawa would occasionally stop by to check on Izuku's training. Finally, the weekend arrived, and Izuku was excited to meet Shoto at the playground. He couldn't wait to tell Shoto that they were going to be pro-heroes together, especially now that his quirk had manifested. As he approached the swings, he spotted Shoto, who greeted him with a small smile. Izuku shared his excitement about his quirk, exclaiming that it was called Erase, and was similar to his father's. Shoto reminded him that he was adopted, but Izuku was determined to change that. They planned to visit the legal office to cancel the adoption, armed with proof from the DNA test that confirmed Zawa was his biological father. Shoto's smile widened as they discussed their experiences from the week, but soon they had to part ways. Shoto headed home while Izuku decided to stay a bit longer. Now 7 years old, Izuku reflected on how his father had started training him in hand-to-hand combat last month. Although he had less time to see Shoto, they kept in touch through texts. He was beginning to understand why Shoto was hesitant to use his left side, but he worried about losing his only friend if he confronted him about it. Ectoplasm had helped improve the radius of Izuku's quirk and taught him how to avoid blinking, as blinking would deactivate his quirk, including its radius and touch. If he touched someone while activated, they would lose their quirk until he blinked, which irritated his eyes and made it difficult to avoid blinking. He was training to build endurance for his quirk usage. Currently, his father had him running 25 laps around Gym Gamma and completing 10 push-ups, sit-ups, and pull-ups at the training field. Each week, his father would increase the numbers, and this routine continued throughout the year. At 9 years old, Izuku continued his studies with Nizu, focusing on reviewing past lessons since he had already completed high school and college subjects. His training consumed hours each day. Although his body was physically strong, his muscles were not overly pronounced, maintaining a naturally slender build that hinted at future height. Today was his birthday, but that did not mean he could escape his rigorous training routine. He often complained to his father about the demanding regimen, which included running 600 laps to build stamina, followed by a brief 5-minute break, and then a series of 100 push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, and 2 hours of combat training. Having just turned 9, Izuku's father and Papa promised him wonderful gifts. After training, he headed to the locker rooms, where he was sometimes joined by other students. They greeted him warmly, and he reciprocated. The first-year students often seemed confused, but he managed to befriend them, appreciating their understanding of his behavior. He noticed he was slowly becoming more like his father, though he believed he was handling things better. After changing and tidying up a bit, he went to the teacher's lounge to wait for Zawa and Zashi. To his surprise, they were not in class. Suddenly, they shouted, "Happy 9th birthday, Izuku!" Auntie Namuri enveloped him in a tight hug, making it difficult for him to breathe until his father intervened. Zawa reminded her to let him breathe. Namuri handed him a pile of boxes, insisting he open her gifts first. Izuku questioned why they had given him so many when they had agreed on one gift each year. Papa urged them to spoil him, claiming their money would just sit in the bank if they didn't spend it on him. Zawa sighed, agreeing that aside from donations and funds for UA, they had little else to spend on but personal items and him. He reassured Izuku that Hizashi, a pro hero and teacher, was doing well with his own radio show. Izuku ran up to Zawa and hugged him, then excitedly opened all the gifts. His father gave him his last gift, adhering to their agreement. As he unwrapped it, he discovered the most beautiful item he had always wanted. It was a dark green capture scarf, slightly smaller than Zawa's but perfect for him. His father assured him that he would buy new ones if it became too small, and Izuku hugged him again in gratitude. At 11 years old, Izuku was learning to use and understand the capture scarf, though he still made small mistakes that frustrated him. His quirk had developed, allowing him to extend its border to a 10-meter radius, but he could only maintain it for 15 seconds. To keep his opponents from seeing when he used his quirk, he wore specially designed goggles. He practiced analyzing during combat against his father, who had mastered fighting without his quirk when his eyes grew tired. With 3 years until the entrance exam, Izuku knew he needed to train more seriously. He wanted to update the name of his quirk and discussed it with his father. When he suggested the name Obliterate, his father considered it carefully before agreeing to the change. Izuku's training intensified. The once manageable 25 laps around Gym Gamma had escalated to 1,000 laps around the school. He replaced pull-ups with light weightlifting, and the 2-hour combat sessions that once left him exhausted for an hour now lasted 3, during which he managed to evade and occasionally land hits on his father. Despite his progress, he had yet to win a match against him, fueling his determination to train harder. At 14, with only 9 months. Until the UA entrance exam, Izuku took on the challenge of cleaning Dagoba Beach, a task his father had cleverly suggested. After 10 months of preparation, the entrance exam loomed just 4 days away. One morning, his father shouted at him to get in the car, threatening to cut his hair himself. Izuku protested, insisting he liked his hair the way it was. Zashi chimed in, pointing out that Izuku's hair resembled a green mop. Feeling cornered, Izuku retorted that Zashi's hair was similar, especially since he tied it up every time. Just when he thought he had escaped, he found himself ensnared by his father's capture tape, leading to a moment of playful frustration. The 4 days had passed. In the end, Dad and Papa successfully took Izuku to the barbershop for a haircut. He had been wrapped around Zawa's capture weapon the whole time. Now, with his hair short again, it was time for the entrance exams. Zashi and Zawa had already left, saying they needed to help prepare at the school. Izuku could have gone with them, but he knew he would only end up bored. So, he found himself riding a train. Finally reaching his stop, he walked for a few more minutes until he arrived at the school entrance. He encouraged himself, reminding that he had prepared for this moment. As he approached the door, he spotted a familiar head of white and red hair. He called out to Shoto, who looked back and offered a small smile. Izuku quickened his pace to catch up. Shoto greeted him, noting the change in Izuku's hairstyle. Izuku nodded enthusiastically, feeling a rush of excitement at seeing his friend. He asked Shoto if he had visited his mother as suggested. Shoto replied that it had gone well. Izuku beamed at this news, and they chatted as they made their way to the stadium for orientation. Zashi was the host, greeting everyone with his quirk. The crowd fell silent, and Izuku managed a quiet greeting, though Zashi likely wouldn't hear it. Zashi exclaimed about the lack of enthusiasm from the students and proceeded to explain the details of the entrance exam, mentioning 3 robots. Halfway through his speech, a boy with blue hair and glasses interrupted, raising his hand to voice a concern about the number of robots mentioned in the flyers. The boy pointed at Izuku, suggesting that if he was just going to sleep, he should drop out of the exam. Izuku felt a surge of irritation and calmly explained that his drowsiness was due to his quirk. Zashi then clarified that there was a faux robot worth 0 points and advised everyone to avoid it. He encouraged recommendation students to start their written exams while others should head to their designated exam grounds. After the written exams, it was time for the practicals. Inasa took first place, Izuku came in second, and Shoto placed third. Izuku noticed that Shoto seemed tense throughout the exam, even if he didn't show it much. Afterward, Izuku approached Inasa to apologize for Shoto's earlier behavior, explaining that Endeavor must have nagged him again that morning. Inasa responded with a comment about Shoto being like his father, which irritated Izuku. He defended Shoto, stating that he hated being compared to his father and that he was trying to apologize for his friend's behavior. Once the exams were over, Shoto received permission from his father to hang out with Izuku. As they were about to exit the front gates, Inasa came running toward them, calling out their names. He bowed and apologized for judging them earlier, expressing a desire to be friends. They forgave him easily, and Shoto seemed more relaxed knowing he could spend time with Izuku. Shoto invited Inasa to join them, and they headed to a nearby mall, where they decided to eat soba, as Shoto chose the restaurant. Inasa asked Izuku about his quirk, noting that he had seen Inasa's whirlwind ability and Shoto's ice manipulation. Izuku explained that his quirk was called Obliterate, which he preferred over Erasure because it sounded cooler. Shoto commented on the name change while slurping his soba. Inasa laughed, intrigued by Izuku's quirk, and asked how it worked. Izuku explained that he could erase someone's quirk in 3 ways: by looking at them, being within a certain radius, or by touch. Inasa remarked that it sounded overpowered, to which Izuku explained the drawbacks, including drowsiness and dry eyes, requiring him to train intensely to maintain his ability for longer PRDS. After finishing their meal, they parted ways. Izuku returned home just before 8, finding Dad and Papa waiting for him. He greeted them cheerfully as he closed the door behind him. Dad teased him about being a problem child, and Izuku shared that he had hung out with Shoto and Inasa, who had become friends. Dad inquired about Shoto, and Izuku replied that he was fine and had visited his mother, which pleased Papa. He invited Izuku to eat, having prepared katsudon. Though Izuku had already eaten, he could never refuse Papa's cooking. They enjoyed the meal together, and Dad expressed confidence that Izuku would pass the upcoming results. The letter arrived, confirming that Izuku had passed. It stated that he had been accepted into UA, with classes starting the following Monday in Class 1A. The letter was shorter than he expected, and Dad joked about trying to make it sound exciting with exclamation points. Izuku shrugged, saying he preferred shorter letters, and Dad playfully noted that Izuku was starting to act like him. Papa shouted enthusiastically while using his quirk, but Dad quickly erased it. The response was simple. It was just the hot chocolate Papa had made moments ago. With a nod, I headed to my room to change into my training clothes. I called out to Dad and Zawa, asking if they wanted me to pick up anything from the mall during my run. Just as I was about to leave, I remembered something important. I mentioned the old black sleeping bag Dad always used, the one that had seen better days. His expression was one of confusion, and I bluntly informed him that I had thrown it away. His shocked reaction was loud and dramatic, but I simply waved goodbye, leaving him to his surprise. A week later, I found myself standing in front of my classroom door, which was impressively large. As I entered, I spotted the boy who had pointed me out during a presentation. I sighed, knowing it was going to be a long year. Suddenly, a girl with short hair and a natural blush bumped into me from behind. She introduced herself as Ochako Uraraka, expressing her hope that we could be friends. From the floor, a familiar voice interrupted, telling her to go somewhere else if she wanted to play at being friends. I turned to see him, who monotonously reminded us that this was the hero course while sipping on a juice packet. I couldn't help but burst into laughter at the absurdity of it all. He quickly used his capture weapon to silence me and instructed Ochako to take her seat, pulling me along with him in his new yellow sleeping bag, a result of my earlier actions. He finally released me, clearly annoyed. I complied and took my seat behind a familiar blonde, still trying to contain my giggles. Dad then revealed the training uniforms, prompting a chorus of disbelief from the class. I snickered and yawned lazily. When we reached the training ground, Dad called out to Bakugo Katsuki, who had scored the highest in the entrance exam. Dad asked about his best score in middle school, to which Bakugo replied with a number. Dad tossed him a ball, challenging him to use his quirk. Bakugo shouted dramatically as he threw the ball with an explosion of energy. I commented dryly on his choice of words, intrigued. Dad reminded everyone to know their limits as the first step to improvement, urging them to go beyond their limits. A girl with pink skin expressed her excitement, but Zawa quickly interjected, smirking as he warned that only those who trained hard would succeed. He emphasized the seriousness of the hero course, reminding us that life wasn't fair, especially in the face of villains. I couldn't help but think I looked pretty cool in that moment, and Dad seemed to appreciate my antics. After some more instructions, Dad told us to start running. I felt drowsy again, but I knew if I didn't put in enough effort, Dad would ramp up the training. I devised a plan to get through it without too much trouble, thinking I was quite clever. From Aizawa's perspective, he could tell his child was up to something with that mischievous smile. Watching the students go through their tests was somewhat underwhelming, though a few stood out as competent. However, one student was clearly not taking things seriously. During the ball throw test, Aizawa decided to intervene before the student could throw. He wrapped him in his capture weapon, warning him to stop slacking off or face expulsion. The other students murmured in surprise at the student's performance, but Aizawa was not impressed. The student protested, but Aizawa silenced him with a glare, insisting that he needed to step up his game. Aizawa pressed a button to reveal the scores, noting that Izuku had placed 5th and needed to improve. He instructed the class to change and have lunch, allowing them some freedom while keeping an eye on Izuku, who seemed unusually tired. When he caught up with Izuku, he learned about a villain encounter that had left him drained. Aizawa sighed, realizing this kid was going to be a handful. As the class settled in, they began to orient themselves and get to know one another. Aizawa-sensei didn't give them a chance for an orientation, so the blue-haired boy suggested they do it now. He made robotic hand gestures as he spoke. One of the others questioned how he knew their teacher's name since he hadn't introduced himself earlier. The group chimed in, asking if the person had listened to the hologram the school sent. Confused, the boy replied that he thought it was just a letter. A girl named Yororozu explained that the hologram stated their homeroom teacher was Shota Aizawa. Shoto then asked if Aizawa had told him anything. The boy admitted he only received a short, lazily handwritten letter saying he passed and would be in class 1A. The others looked puzzled. From his sleeping bag, Aizawa's monotone voice interrupted, revealing he had been listening the whole time. He had intended to surprise his son by being his homeroom teacher, but the boy had laughed about the yellow sleeping bag instead. He added that a hologram wouldn't impress him much either. Then, he told the students to get back to whatever they were doing as he turned to face the wall, presumably going back to sleep. The class, filled with cheerfulness, decided to get started. The boy, however, opted to nap, asking Ingenium to call him up last. After about 20 minutes of rest, he realized he couldn't sleep, so he decided to listen to the introductions. The familiar blonde had an interesting reason for being there, something about searching for a childhood friend and keeping promises. When it was his turn, he heard a redhead call out to him. Recognizing the voice, he explained that he had just remembered it from earlier introductions. He stood up and introduced himself, stating that his quirk was Obliterate, which allowed him to erase quirks in 3 ways, with the only way to deactivate it being by blinking. The class reacted with excitement, asking how he fought. He explained that he fought quirkless but used a capture weapon, which he had left at home that day. He hoped they would get along and asked them to call him Izuku to avoid confusion, introducing himself as Izuku Aizawa. The class was shocked to learn his last name. Izuku noticed the surprised expressions and asked if something was wrong. A pink alien girl inquired if he was Aizawa's son, to which he nodded. They seemed to understand, making faces that indicated it made sense. Kirishima then asked how Aizawa was as a father. Izuku replied that he was fun, but Shoto pointed out that his tone contradicted his words. Izuku clarified that while his father was fun, the training was quite intense. He decided to excuse himself, feeling he had taken up too much time. The next day, Izuku found himself in class with Ida and Uraraka. Surprisingly, they got along well, even if their energy was a bit overwhelming for him. They had just finished English with Papa Zashi and were waiting for Uncle Toshi, also known as All Might, to enter the classroom. Izuku felt a bond with All Might, who had expressed a desire to teach the students, though Izuku sensed there was more to it. When Uraraka and Ida moved to sit elsewhere, Izuku thought he could finally catch some sleep. However, the door swung open, revealing All Might in his muscular form. He announced his arrival with enthusiasm, which drew murmurs from the class, who found it far from normal yet exciting. All Might then declared they would be going to ground Beta for a 2-on-2 fight. Izuku thought to himself that things escalated quickly and considered buying All Might a book on teaching children. They took a quick bus ride to ground Beta, where the others were. Still in awe. Even though they had used it for the entrance exam, the experience of UA remained overwhelming for them. Izuku had grown accustomed to it over the months, often visiting with Nizu to improve his analytical skills and assist teachers. He had practically grown up at UA. In the changing room, he admired the colorful costumes of his classmates. He wore a comfortable outfit of jogging pants and a fitted top, mostly black with green accents. His suit was made of special material to protect against fire and destruction, and he had gear shoes to help him jump and land safely. He also wore goggles similar to his father's and, of course, the precious capture scarf wrapped around his neck. As All Might explained the rules of the exercise, Izuku listened attentively. The villain would hide with a papier-mâché bomb, while the heroes needed to touch it or capture the villain to win within 15 minutes. He found the rules fair. When Zero asked how they would choose their teammates, All Might enthusiastically announced they would draw lots. Ida raised his hand, questioning the randomness of the selection. Izuku interjected, explaining that as professionals, they would often have to work with unexpected partners. Ida acknowledged his point and apologized for his earlier question. Izuku reassured him that there was no need to bow and asked him to call him Izuku to avoid confusion with his father. After drawing lots, Izuku found himself paired with Kirishima. They drew again to determine their roles, and fortune smiled upon them as they became the villains. Izuku felt confident about their plan, especially since their opponents would be Bokugu and Shoto. He approached Kirishima, excitedly sharing his strategy. Kirishima was eager to win, and Izuku explained that as long as he maintained control of his quirk, Kirishima would be able to use his. Kirishima was curious about what that meant, and Izuku prepared to elaborate on their plan. One of the ways to erase quirks was for Aizawa to create a specific area. If he focused enough, they could move freely within that space without their quirks affecting them. The second plan seemed easier for him, but he worried about his teammates' enjoyment. They would fight without quirks, relying solely on their physical skills. Aizawa noted that they had the upper hand with his capture gear and hand-to-hand combat training, but he was concerned that his partner might not have as much fun. His teammate expressed his love for using his quirk but reassured Aizawa that they would be fine without it. He was confident in his own hand-to-hand skills and insisted that the second plan would work. Aizawa agreed, pointing out that their opponents relied heavily on their quirks rather than physical abilities. He felt confident in their chances of victory, especially since neither of their opponents was particularly good at teamwork. When asked if he was sure about his assessment, Aizawa explained that while Todoroki was strong, he had focused more on his quirk than on fighting skills. Aizawa had observed Bakugu's aggressive tendencies and predicted he would rush in without a plan. His teammate was impressed by Aizawa's insights. As the fifth team to participate in the activity, they watched their classmates showcase their quirks. Although it wasn't as polished as pro heroes practice fights, it was still a valuable learning experience. Aizawa took out his notebook to jot down notes, which caught the attention of Shiro, who was surprised to see him taking notes. Kaminari, after glancing at Aizawa's writings, decided it was too much information for him and returned the notebook, leaving Aizawa to chuckle at his reaction. With the last match concluded, it was time for Aizawa and Shoto's team to face off. Kirishima and Aizawa entered the designated area as soon as All Might gave the signal. They chose the top floor to tire out their opponents and gain an advantage. Aizawa communicated through his earpiece that they were ready. As the match began, Bakugu charged in with explosive force while Todoroki unleashed ice to freeze the surroundings. Bakugu soared through the air, avoiding the ice's grasp. Aizawa activated his quirk, erasing all quirks within his area, including his own and Kirishima's. He noticed the hues of gray around him and the figures of his teammates and opponents. He realized that erasing long-range quirks was challenging, but he had been working hard to overcome this limitation. The class watched intently as Bakugu and Todoroki began their assault. Bakugu's explosive entrance amazed everyone, while Todoroki's ice manipulation drew gasps. The students speculated about Aizawa and Kirishima's fate, but to their surprise, the cameras showed them unharmed. Yaoyorozu expressed curiosity about why Todoroki's quirk hadn't affected them. All Might explained that once the heroes stepped onto the top floor, they would be fighting without their quirks, which was a crucial aspect of the training. As Bakugu entered the top floor, he suddenly found himself unable to use his quirk. Confused, he questioned why he couldn't activate it. In his frustration, he reminded Aizawa of a small, angry dog. While Bakugu was preoccupied with his outburst, Kirishima seized the opportunity to restrain him with capture tape. They awaited Todoroki's arrival, which came about a minute later. Upon entering, Todoroki was shocked to see that his opponents were not frozen, realizing he would have to rely on his combat skills. He expressed disbelief that long-distance quirks could be countered, to which Aizawa replied that he had trained hard to overcome such challenges. Todoroki prepared to engage Kirishima, both of whom displayed impressive combat skills. Aizawa noted Todoroki's improvement and Kirishima's dedication to training. After an intense spar, Kirishima emerged victorious, securing Todoroki with tape. The villains had won the match, and back in the camera room, the classmates were left in awe of Aizawa's quirk. A few minutes later, the four participants returned to the camera room, where everyone was watching. Aizawa greeted them with confusion, while Shiro jokingly expressed his pressure after watching the match, though his determination was evident. Aizawa felt embarrassed by the attention, prompting Todoroki to comment on his friend's more childish side, which elicited laughter from their classmates. Bakugu, feeling frustrated, looked away, reflecting on how similar Aizawa was to him in both appearance and personality, despite their differences in quirks. The atmosphere lightened. Aizawa's teammate posed a question to him, eager to continue their discussion. Kirishima asked about the implications of Aizawa's quirk and Izuku's quirk being used on each other, having observed how Izuku's ability functioned. Young Aizawa shared that they had actually tested this scenario, and the results were quite fascinating. He prepared to explain the details, noting that with the assistance of several other heroes who possessed emitter-type quirks, they activated their quirks on one another. Aizawa attempted to erase the quirk of another pro-hero within his line of sight, and the pro-hero found himself unable to use his quirk. The same occurred for Izuku when he focused on another pro-hero. They too were unable to activate their abilities. Aizawa noted that his own quirk was still functioning, confirming that it had not been erased. He then recounted how he touched another pro-hero while Aizawa's quirk was still in effect, and that hero could not use their quirk until he blinked. The class listened intently, some of them wearing expressions that suggested they were struggling to absorb all the information. Yaoyorozu then summarized the situation, clarifying that they did not affect each other's quirks, which prompted a collective realization among the others. Izuku acknowledged her simplification, recognizing that he could have conveyed the information more straightforwardly. It's been a week since school started, and on Wednesday, there was a trip planned to USJ. Now it was Sunday, and Izuku was training with his dad. They sparred against each other, and this marked his 978th loss since they began this kind of training. Not once had he won, and he couldn't shake the feeling of inadequacy that lingered in his mind. Something else was bothering him. As they took a break on a bench, Izuku called out to his dad. He looked over, his usual tired expression evident. Izuku expressed his concerns about the upcoming trip to USJ, his voice tinged with worry. His dad raised an eyebrow, curious about his son's apprehension. Izuku mentioned the strange incident involving the disintegration of the front gates of UA just a few days prior. He recalled Ida's observation of a purple warp that had closed before disappearing. His dad questioned the connection Izuku was trying to make, and Izuku explained that the recent events felt like a distraction, especially with the schedule being lost. Realizing he had raised his voice, Izuku quickly softened his demeanor, feeling regretful. His dad sighed, reassuring him that all might, 13, and he would be there, and backup would arrive through the emergency line. However, this did little to ease Izuku's anxiety. After a moment, Izuku spoke again, revealing that he had discovered a way to keep his quirk activated under unusual circumstances. His dad, intrigued, asked for clarification. Izuku explained that he had found a method to activate his quirk differently, but it required specific conditions. He recalled a time he had missed school for 3 days, during which he had tested his theory about quirks being activated through sleep. He had learned that almost every quirk could be activated this way, but it was challenging as each had its own conditions. Fortunately, he had found his conditions, which involved sleeping pills. His dad's expression shifted to one of concern as he questioned where Izuku had obtained the sleeping pills, expressing his disapproval. Izuku insisted that it was beside the point and mentioned quirk support pills from Mr. David. His dad confirmed that David was the one from I-Island and inquired about how this unusual activation worked. Izuku explained that it involved sleep, and when activated, it would cover an area larger than USJ. He would remain asleep for 2 days after the quirk wore off. His dad questioned why he was sharing this information, noting that Izuku usually preferred to showcase his quirk in front of an audience. Izuku smirked, stating that he wanted to be prepared in case something went wrong, hoping to help his classmates escape using this technique. His dad sighed and agreed to speak with Principal Nizu. As the day progressed, Izuku found himself on the bus with his classmates, ready with the sleeping and quirk support pills. They arrived shortly after, and upon disembarking, they were greeted by 13, who would be their instructor for the day. The class marveled at the impressive building, likening it to Universal Studios Japan. 13 began explaining her quirk and the purpose of the building when Kirishima interrupted, exclaiming about the fake villains. However, 13 clarified that they were real villains, prompting panic among the students. As chaos ensued, Izuku quickly moved to his designated safe spot, taking the quirk support pills followed by the sleeping pills. Almost instantly, he fell asleep, his last thought being about the villains. In the center of the building, a man with blue hair and multiple hands stood near the fountains, accompanied by a strange bird-like creature and a figure shrouded in mist. The blue-haired man declared their intention to kill All Might, his lackeys laughing in excitement. As the class fled, The smoky figure attempted to pursue them but transformed into a formal-looking man with purplish-black hair. Aizawa prepared to engage, but he was interrupted by a piercing scream from one of the villains, who began to change physically. Aizawa realized that Izuku's quirk had already taken effect. Amidst the confusion, Shigaraki, the blue-haired villain, expressed his frustration at the unexpected turn of events. The bird-like creature they had brought began to dissolve, its quirk nullified. The misty figure suggested retreating, and Shigaraki, still fuming, complied. They left behind their low-ranking henchmen and their failed plan to eliminate All Might. Aizawa, bruised and in need of rest, would require a day in the hospital, but his injuries were minor. The villains had fled just as All Might and other pro-heroes arrived, along with the police for backup. Recovery Girl was absent, so Aizawa was placed in a car despite his reluctance to ride in an ambulance. He thought of his son as Mike approached, worry etched on his face. Sitting in one of the chairs, Aizawa heard his husband Mike calling to him with concern. Mike rushed over, asking if he was okay, and Aizawa nodded in response. Mike began to suggest an ambulance, but Aizawa interrupted, insisting they take the car instead. Suddenly, Mick's expression shifted to worry as he asked where Izuku was. Aizawa's eyes widened in realization. He mentally scolded himself for forgetting their son. He pointed to a spot on the USJ map, explaining that Izuku was likely still inside the building, probably sleeping. Mike dashed toward the building, and before he could enter, he found Izuku peacefully asleep in All Might's arms. All Might reassured Mike that Izuku was safe but noted that it was unusual for him to be sleeping at such a time. After a brief conversation with Detective Naomasa, All Might left quickly, aware of his own limits. Eventually, Aizawa pleaded to ride in the ambulance with Izuku, who was initially supposed to be transported separately. Seeing Aizawa's desperation, the medical team allowed him to stay with his son, while Mike drove himself to the hospital. Nizu accompanied them, eager to learn more about the new technique Izuku had discovered, which seemed powerful. Within an hour, they arrived at the hospital, where Aizawa and Izuku were quickly given a room for examination. Nizu inquired about Izuku's condition, questioning why he was in this state. Aizawa explained that Izuku had found a way to activate his quirk by sleeping instead of keeping his eyes open for extended PRDS. Nizu's curiosity was evident as he considered the implications, noting that the technique likely had a time limit. Mike asked about the drawbacks, and Aizawa sighed, revealing that Izuku mentioned it would result in a 2-day sleep marathon. The couple settled in to wait for Izuku to wake up. Aizawa was jolted from his thoughts when Mike called his name from their room. Mick's quirk was under control, but Aizawa was still taken aback by the volume. He sighed and walked over, only to find Mike looking anxious. Mike had received a call from the hospital, informing him that Izuku was still not awake, which made him increasingly worried. Aizawa felt frustration bubbling inside him as he instructed Mike to change his clothes for a trip to the hospital. Within minutes, Mike joined Aizawa in the car, and they sped toward the hospital. Aizawa was tense, and Mike tried to calm him down, but Aizawa's anxiety about Izuku's condition made it difficult for him to relax. He apologized for raising his voice, explaining that he was worried about their son. Tears threatened to spill, but he held them back. When they arrived at the hospital, Aizawa rushed inside, demanding to know where Izuku was. Nurses and doctors quickly guided him to his son's room. Seeing Izuku asleep, with a normal heart rate, only deepened Aizawa's concern. He questioned the staff about why Izuku was still asleep. Mike reminded Aizawa to remain composed, and Aizawa took a deep breath to steady himself. The doctor explained that they didn't know why Izuku was still unconscious but indicated that he showed signs of waking up soon. If he remained unresponsive beyond a week, they would have to consider more serious measures. Aizawa felt a wave of despair wash over him at the thought of Izuku being labeled as comatose, blaming himself for allowing this to happen. Frustrated, Aizawa left the room, deciding to return home with Mike. The next day, he convinced Mike to let him return to work, using Izuku's situation as part of his reasoning. Mike sighed, looking at Aizawa as if he were hopeless, but eventually nodded in agreement. As Aizawa walked through UA's hallways, he arrived at Class 1A's door. Entering the classroom, He found Ida rushing back to his seat while Bakugo attempted to explode Kaminari's head. Kirishima shielded Kaminari, and Mina cheered them on. Aizawa sighed, drawing their attention. The students began to whisper among themselves, speculating about Aizawa's mood. Aizawa felt his irritation grow, but he was grateful for Yaoyorozu, who raised her hand to ask about Izuku. Aizawa informed the class that Izuku was in a coma and likely wouldn't return until the following week. The students reacted with shock, and Aizawa felt a tick of annoyance. He reassured them that Izuku would wake up, explaining that it was just a drawback of his quirk. As the class fell silent, Aizawa began the lesson, his thoughts lingering on Izuku. Better wake up, problem child. Aizawa was nearing the end of the week with no calls from the hospital. He couldn't visit during the day due to classes, and night visits were rarely allowed. While lost in thought in the teacher's lounge, a text from the hospital arrived, announcing that Izuku was awake. He sprang from his seat, urging Hizashi to get ready. As they opened the door to leave, they encountered Nizu, who informed them that Izuku was awake and that someone would like to meet them. Aizawa felt puzzled about how Nizu knew about Izuku's situation but decided to let it go. After all, it was Nizu. At the hospital, Aizawa and Hizashi rushed to Izuku's room. Upon entering, they found him sitting up in bed, just finishing notes in his notebook. Aizawa called out to him and embraced him tightly, with Hizashi joining in. Izuku, surprised, asked why they were there. Aizawa playfully smacked him on the head, expressing his frustration that Izuku had been sleeping longer than expected. Izuku, confused, reminded them that he had mentioned he would be sleeping for 2 days. Aizawa sighed, explaining that it had been 4 days and that it was Saturday. Hizashi reassured Izuku that they would get him out soon and that they would discuss his condition later. Aizawa gently pushed him back down on the bed, and Izuku complied, saying okay. After stepping out to find a doctor, Aizawa asked Hizashi to keep an eye on Izuku. When he returned, he was about to share that they could go home when he noticed Izuku had fallen asleep again, with Hizashi watching over him. Hizashi acknowledged Aizawa's presence and confirmed they could leave. Aizawa decided to carry Izuku, knowing that his bed at home would be more comfortable than the hospital bed. With Hizashi's help, they got Izuku into the car, laying him gently in the back seat. Aizawa noted that despite Izuku's strength, he was smaller than most kids his age. He wished that Izuku could remain a child forever, firmly believing he was still just a child. Once home, they carried Izuku to his room and laid him on the bed. Hizashi stayed with him while Aizawa headed to UA. He recalled Nizu mentioning that someone wanted to meet him. After classes, with some students engaged in club activities or training, Aizawa made his way to Nizu's office. Upon entering, he was surprised to see Hitoshi there. Aizawa asked about Hitoshi's mother, only to be met with the devastating news that she had passed away in a car accident. Aizawa's heart sank, and he felt a wave of frustration wash over him. Hitoshi then asked if Aizawa would be his legal guardian. Aizawa agreed, but first, they needed to visit Hitoshi's mother's grave. Hitoshi revealed that he had been unable to visit due to his father's abusive nature, a revelation that shocked Aizawa. He reassured Hitoshi that he would be his guardian from now on. Hitoshi smiled softly, a rare expression for him. Nizu informed Aizawa that Hitoshi had been staying at the dorms due to his situation, but there was still a room available in Aizawa's house. Aizawa promised Hitoshi that he would meet his cousin, Izuku, once he was feeling better. They exchanged respectful bows with Nizu before leaving. As they walked home, Aizawa engaged in small talk with Hitoshi, who shared his plans to join the hero course through the upcoming sports festival. Aizawa encouraged him, recalling how he had also entered the hero course after a successful performance at the festival. Upon arriving home, Aizawa invited Hitoshi to make himself comfortable. He suggested that Hitoshi could sleep in Izuku's room for now, as there was a couch available. Aizawa laid out some of Izuku's oversized clothes for Hitoshi to use and directed him to the bathroom. He then led Hitoshi to Izuku's room, whispering for Hizashi. Hizashi woke up and approached them, curious about the new arrival. Aizawa introduced Hitoshi as his nephew, explaining the situation regarding his mother. The mood turned somber as Aizawa mentioned her passing and their plans to visit her grave next week. Hizashi expressed his condolences, and the atmosphere shifted as they tried to lighten the mood. Hizashi made Hitoshi feel welcome, suggesting that he call him Papa and Aizawa Dad, which Hitoshi accepted. Aizawa then announced that he would prepare dinner while they tried to wake Izuku to see if the medication had worn off. Following Hizashi, Hitoshi entered Izuku's room, where the light revealed his cousin's peaceful appearance. Hizashi gently shook Izuku awake, informing him that it was time for dinner and that they had someone for him to meet. As Izuku rubbed his eyes and looked at Hitoshi, the introduction felt a bit awkward, but Hitoshi managed to greet him. Hitoshi introduced himself, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. He wondered if Izuku was truly Uncle Shota's son. Regardless, he felt a connection as he acknowledged Izuku as his cousin. Izuku greeted Hitoshi with enthusiasm, his energy suddenly surging. He ran over and introduced himself, expressing his joy at meeting Hitoshi. They shook hands, and Izuku eagerly pulled Hitoshi toward the kitchen. Hitoshi glanced at Hizashi, who smiled back, seemingly relieved. Hizashi had just come downstairs when their father noticed them. Izuku had wrapped his arms around Hitoshi, resembling a tarsier in his excitement. Their dad smirked, noting how rare it was for Izuku to take such a liking to someone. He recalled the last time it had happened with a Todoroki kid, a memory long faded for Izuku. Soon, they sat down to eat, and Hitoshi found the katsudon delicious, despite his mother's claim that Uncle Shota couldn't cook. Izuku caught Hitoshi's hesitant words about their dad's cooking skills and seemed to understand. When Hitoshi asked if Uncle Shota really made the katsudon, Izuku and Hizashi shared a laugh, while their dad gave Hitoshi a look that seemed to say he was welcome to stay or leave. Their dad sighed and confirmed he had cooked the meal, explaining it was Izuku's favorite. Hitoshi turned to Izuku, who was happily munching on the veggies and pork, and declared he would learn to cook katsudon. After dinner, Hitoshi and Izuku had time to get to know each other better. Hitoshi was surprised by Izuku's excitement, especially since he had always seemed serious at school. They found themselves in Izuku's room, lying on the bed and exchanging questions. However, Hitoshi felt a sudden weight when Izuku asked about his quirk. He hesitated before revealing that his quirk was brainwash, bracing himself for a negative reaction. Instead, Izuku exclaimed with enthusiasm, which startled Hitoshi. He could hear Hizashi calling for them to keep it down from the living room. Hitoshi was taken aback by Izuku's positive response and felt a sense of determination to be the best big brother figure for him. Izuku was curious about how Hitoshi's quirk worked, and Hitoshi began to explain. They continued discussing their quirks and support items that could help Hitoshi, including the capture scarf, which Izuku mentioned was useful for apprehending villains. They talked until fatigue set in, and before they knew it, they had drifted off to sleep. Meanwhile, Hizashi noticed the quiet and decided to check on the kids. He knocked on Izuku's door but received no answer, which made him worry. Letting himself in, he discovered a heartwarming scene. Izuku and Hitoshi were peacefully sleeping next to each other, surrounded by Shota's cats. Hizashi snapped a picture, realizing that not only did Izuku like Hitoshi, but the cats seemed to have taken a liking to him as well. He could sense Shota's stress about how things would unfold between the two, despite the positive signs. Shota arrived and smiled at the sight of the two sleeping boys. He felt reassured, knowing there was nothing to worry about. It had been a week since Hitoshi had much of a chance to talk to Izuku at school, and Uncle Zawa, now his legal guardian, had been keeping a close watch on him. Hitoshi observed Izuku, trying to understand him better, especially since they were becoming like brothers. He noticed that Izuku had two distinct sides. One was mature and serious, while the other was shy and childish. When he asked his dad and Papa about it, they assured him it was normal. The date for the sports festival had been announced, and Hitoshi watched the Hero Corps students train from their classroom window. He noticed Izuku practicing combat moves against the air, seemingly focused on his training. When the lunch bell rang, some of Hitoshi's friends invited him to join them in a light-hearted prank on the Hero Corps students. As they waited in front of Class 1A's door, an angry blonde student burst out, yelling about something. The noise stopped when he noticed them, and he shouted, demanding to know what they were doing there. Hitoshi replied in a monotone voice that they were checking out the competition. The blonde continued to boast about being part of the Hero Corps, his ego on full display. Then, a student named Ida rushed in front of the blonde, apologizing for his behavior with an exaggerated bow. Hitoshi shot them a sharp look, reminding them that even general education students could qualify for the hero course if they proved themselves in the festival. The reaction from the hero course students was one of worry, while his classmates smirked, hoping to provoke them further. Just then, he spotted Izuku approaching the door, chatting with Todoroki and the energetic Inasa. Izuku ran to Hitoshi, hugging him excitedly and calling out his name. Hitoshi returned the hug, greeting him with a smirk and noting how Izuku's childish side was showing again. Izuku introduced his friends, Shoto and Inasa, and Hitoshi shook Shoto's hand before being pulled into a lively friendship proposal from Inasa. Hitoshi agreed to be friends, and then he suggested they eat lunch together, promising to ask Lunch Rush to make Izuku his favorite dish, katsudon. Izuku's eyes lit up with excitement, reminding Hitoshi of a little kid. As they made their way to the cafeteria, Hitoshi felt a sense of camaraderie with his new friends, leaving the hero course students behind. In the cafeteria, they stood in line, and when Lunch Rush spotted Izuku, he immediately asked what he wanted. Izuku enthusiastically replied, and Hitoshi realized he didn't need to intervene at all. After getting their meals, they found an empty table by the window. As they ate, Hitoshi learned more about Shoto, the son of Endeavor. Although he found that interesting, he also recalled a past encounter that had left a mark on him. Shoto mentioned his strained relationship with his father, and Hitoshi decided not to pry further. Hitoshi then shared his ambition of joining the hero course, explaining how he planned to use his quirk effectively despite its challenges. Izuku smiled widely, and Inasa cheered him on, while Shoto nodded in agreement. They all agreed to help each other out, and Hitoshi felt a genuine smile spread across his face, knowing it was sincere. After school, Hitoshi went home with Izuku, and their dad had adjusted his schedule to train them. Hitoshi felt a bit guilty for Izuku, who had been training hard for the sports festival. He admired Izuku's dedication, especially under Uncle Zawa's rigorous training regimen. In the backyard, they practiced combat skills, with Izuku helping Hitoshi strategize and utilize his quirk. Hitoshi took a break to grab coffee for the three of them, knowing that Papa would soon be home to prepare dinner. He could already picture the determined look on Papa's face, and he knew they would be pushed hard in training. After 3 weeks of intense practice, their dad and Papa decided they needed a full day of rest before the big event. Hitoshi and Izuku took the opportunity to catch up on sleep, playing games on their phones before dozing off. When Hitoshi woke up early the next day, he found Izuku still asleep beside him. He gently moved a cat that had settled on Izuku's face, not wanting to wake him too soon. After fixing some blankets for Izuku, he headed to the kitchen, where Dad and Papa were preparing breakfast. The delicious smell of eggs and bacon filled the air, and Hitoshi sat down at the table as Papa slid a plate of food in front of him. The meal made him feel excited, and he dug in happily. Breakfast meals were usually simple due to their parents' early schedules. Papa had a habit of waking up later than intended, while Dad often made bland eggs, forgetting to add salt because of his sleep deprivation. This left Izuku to cook a decent egg, which they enjoyed on toast. As they were finishing their breakfast, Izuku appeared in the hallway, holding one of the cats and rubbing his eyes. He let out a yawn, looking adorably sleepy, which made it clear he was the little brother. The narrator greeted him with a cheerful morning, and Izuku returned the greeting, walking closer to them. He also greeted Dad and Papa, yawning again. Both adults replied with morning greetings. Dad mentioned that the school gates were likely open and suggested they head there early to avoid a large crowd, which could be difficult to manage. He took a sip of his black coffee. Izuku and Papa nodded eagerly, while the narrator quietly agreed, leading them to finish their meals and coffee before getting ready. At the front gates of UA, a line of civilians, their future audience, was forming, all showing their tickets. Some heroes were present too, which excited Izuku. The narrator had to pull him away from the heroes he wanted to approach, and Dad used his capture scarf to help. As they walked, a woman with green hair and something orange on her head approached them. The narrator didn't recognize her until Izuku introduced her in an unexpected way. The woman greeted them enthusiastically, calling out to Eraser. Dad responded with a deadpan remark, appearing somewhat uneasy. Izuku, excited to meet her, noticed she seemed familiar with Dad. She waved at him after his enthusiastic greeting. She jokingly suggested they get married, which caught the narrator's attention. Dad responded with a dismissive remark that made her laugh. Curious, the narrator asked Aizawa how he met Ms. Joke, noting their apparent closeness. Aizawa shot him a look that conveyed a mix of surprise and disapproval, while Toshi turned away, trying to stifle his laughter. Ms. Joke began to recount their love story, explaining how their agencies were close and how they became a couple, but she was interrupted by Aizawa's expression of disinterest, which left her acting dramatically as if heartbroken. Although the narrator knew Dad was married to Papa, he realized Ms. Joke's dream scenario was unlikely to happen, but the idea of their agencies being near each other sparked his imagination. Toshi teased Dad, poking his shoulder and breaking the moment. He snapped the narrator out of his thoughts, prompting him to ask Ms. Joke if she was joking. She laughed, leaving him confused about whether she was serious or just playing around. Dad ruffled his hair, reminding him to focus. Ms. Joke playfully insisted that Eraser should let her date him, but Dad bluntly reminded her of his marriage to Hisashi. She suggested it wouldn't hurt to try, and Dad sighed in defeat, telling Izuku he needed to run laps around the campus before the festival started. Izuku decided to take off running, eager to begin. After finishing his laps in 30 minutes, which surprised Shota, Izuku found himself panting in the locker room where his classmates were staring at him. Kirishima asked if he was okay, while Inasa and Denki expressed concern about his exhaustion. Hitoshi smirked from his own locker room, clearly enjoying Izuku's predicament. Feeling tired, Izuku decided to rest in Recovery Girls' clinic, hoping to feel more alert when the event began. Meanwhile, Aizawa was in the teacher's lounge with Mike, who was trying to pull him away from his desk to join him in entertaining the crowd. Yamada, tired of Aizawa's reluctance, picked him up, ignoring his protests. Some students were training while others stretched, and soon they would be called to the stage. Ida, using his quirk, rushed to wake Izuku up, informing him that the event was starting earlier than planned. Izuku quickly got up, realizing he had been asleep for 2 hours. Ida pulled him along, moving at a speed that made Izuku feel like a kite struggling to keep up. Once they reached their designated area, they waited for their section to be called. Mike energized the crowd, officially starting the UA Sports Festival. After some more hype and playful banter with Aizawa, midnight took over the stadium. When Class 1A was called, the crowd erupted in cheers as they walked out, excited to see the next generation of heroes, especially since Class 1A had gained popularity after surviving the villain attack at USJ. Midnight announced that Izuku would be this year's representative, encouraging him to say something to his classmates. Izuku, still a bit sleepy, delivered a lackluster motivational speech, urging everyone to do their best and go plus ultra. Midnight playfully urged him to be more enthusiastic, and he shouted with renewed energy, prompting cheers from the crowd. With the mood lifted, Midnight announced the first event, the obstacle course. At the starting line, Izuku shared an important idea with Hitoshi, who nodded in agreement. Then, perhaps he should inform Todoroki as well. However, Todoroki was quite determined to be number one, just like Inasa. Present Mike signaled for the students to start, prompting everyone to run. Shudo decided to sprint ahead of the others. Hitoshi, Izuku, and Aizawa, who anticipated this move, dodged and slid across the ice, narrowly avoiding some 0-pointers. Izuku thought to himself, 0-pointers? He sighed, wishing he could just run without any interruptions. Alongside Hitoshi, he retrieved 2 capture weapons. Zawa had mentioned they could use them, so he handed one of the scarves to Hitoshi. They began swinging, using the faux villain's parts to propel themselves forward. Todoroki maintained his speed, while Bakugu created explosions, pushing past the 2 quirkless students. Inasa kept pace with Todoroki. As they collected broken parts from the defeated robots, Izuku and Hitoshi reached the next obstacle. It was a long drop, but they could swing using ropes. They executed the maneuver quickly, catching up to the 3 students ahead of them. Shoto and Inasa carefully navigated around the landmines, ensuring they didn't harm any students behind them. Upon reaching the mines, they paused. Shoto instructed Hitoshi to dig down and gather some landmines. Hitoshi complied and Shoto added, "Then we'll ride the sky." "Great thinking, Broccoli." Hitoshi responded with a confident, "I know, I'm a genius." After gathering enough explosives, they jumped. An explosion erupted at the starting line, causing a stir among the crowd. Present Mike exclaimed that Izuku and Hitoshi were soaring through the air, much to the audience's excitement. Aizawa's voice echoed in the background, expressing disbelief at the situation. Now ahead of Todoroki, Inesa, and Bakugo, Izuku and Hitoshi ran with renewed energy. Bakugo's explosions propelled him into the lead, just as Izuku had anticipated. As they approached the finish line, Izuku decided to erase the quirks of those behind him to secure second place. He sprinted faster than before, matching Bakugo's pace, which only fueled Bakugo's competitive spirit. Just before crossing the finish line, Bakugo surged ahead, claiming first place, while Izuku followed closely in second. Inesa took third, and Todoroki came in fourth. Hitoshi, with a significant lead, finished fifth, followed by the others. Bakugo questioned why Izuku allowed him to go first. Izuku simply shrugged, which irritated Bakugo, but he chose to remain calm. Shoto asked why Izuku had made that choice. Izuku smirked, revealing that he had watched the sports festival too many times not to notice the patterns. After the leaderboard was revealed, Midnight announced the next event, the cavalry battle. The rules were explained, and everyone gasped at the mention of a 10 million point headband, except for Hitoshi and Izuku. An angry Bakugo confronted Izuku, accusing him of knowing this would happen. Izuku defended himself, stating it wasn't his fault Bakugo was in first place. Inesa remarked that this was the catch Izuku had mentioned, and Shoto simply smiled. Izuku explained that the winner of the first event often faced challenges in the second, and to secure first place, they would need to steal the 10 million points from Bakugo. When it came time to choose teammates, Izuku assembled a powerful group consisting of his friends and cousin, taking advantage of the lack of rules against strong individuals teaming up. Inesa, Todoroki, Izuku, and Hitoshi formed a formidable team. Present Mike commented on their impressive lineup, while Aizawa monotonously noted that there were no rules against teaming up as long as they had 4 members. Izuku's team aimed for either first or second place. Hitoshi expressed uncertainty about their chances against the 10 million points, which Izuku acknowledged. Inesa, filled with determination, was ready to take on the challenge. Izuku outlined their strategy, presenting 3 options. They could either take everyone else's headbands and ignore the 10 million, steal the 10 million, or steal all the headbands, including the 10 million. Hitoshi exclaimed that Izuku was crazy, drawing the attention of nearby students. Izuku explained that winning outright would be exciting, intentionally raising his voice to taunt other teams. The other students reacted with disbelief, and Todoroki remarked on Izuku's strategy, while Hitoshi questioned if this was revenge for earlier teasing. Izuku clarified that Hitoshi would be the rider, using his quirk to persuade other teams to surrender their headbands. He instructed Todoroki to use his ice powers for defense, while Inesa would create strong winds on the left side. Izuku would focus on erasing quirks as they moved. The 3 teammates nodded in agreement, their confidence bolstered by Izuku's assurance. As Midnight signaled the start of the event, half of the other teams rushed toward Bakugo, while the other half headed for Izuku's team. Todoroki quickly froze the attackers on the right, allowing Hitoshi to collect 4 headbands. Inesa cheered as they counted their progress. Izuku kept an eye on Bakugo's team, contemplating how they could acquire the 10 million points. He noted that the top 4 teams would have to make strategic choices. Bakugo used his quirk to intimidate opponents, often launching himself into the air, but Izuku believed he had the upper hand. After all, what would Bakugo do when his quirk was neutralized? Izuku's quirk was stronger in his plan. He suggested that they wrap up the other teams before going one-on-one with the 10 million headband holder. Hitoshi felt a chill. He recognized that Izuku was in a focused and determined state. He knew Izuku was a genius, almost on par with Nizu, and when he was this confident, victory was within reach. Hitoshi smirked at his cousin's leadership. After stealthily collecting other headbands, they turned their attention to Deku. Shoto ensured that other teams were immobilized, some frozen in place due to Hitoshi's quirk. If anyone managed to escape, Inesa would be ready to fly them away. Izuku called out to Bakugo, who was intent on escaping to protect his headband. Present Mike announced that there was only 1 minute left, followed by cheers from the crowd. Aizawa commented on how Izuku from the hero course was proving to be a strategic mastermind. Todoroki instructed Shoto to freeze their opponents while he erased their quirks, confident that his limit was more than a minute. Hitoshi easily provoked Bakugo, using his quirk to take the 10 million headband. They all felt like secret agents as they celebrated their success. When the time was up, the scores reflected their efforts, 10 million in first place for Hitoshi, while others were marked as 0. However, the competition could not end there. They needed extra minutes to determine the next 3 placers, leading to another cavalry battle. This time, without the 10 million headband and without Hitoshi, Izuku, Shoto, and Inesa. The staff couldn't blame them. They had encouraged everyone to show their best, and that was precisely what the 4 had done. While Izuku and Hitoshi weren't as flashy as Shoto and Inesa, Hitoshi received praise for his impressive quirk. As for Izuku, his quirk remained a mystery to many. Nevertheless, Aizawa's quiet comment about Izuku being a cruel mastermind caught the attention of those around them. Izuku was proving to be an exceptional hero, adept at navigating difficult situations and turning the tide in his favor. Many were pleased that he aspired to be a hero. As the cavalry battle concluded, Bakugo secured second place, Kendo took third, and Uraraka's team came in fourth. Consequently, the next event would be delayed by 5 minutes. Midnight announced a break for the students and the crowd, prompting many to head to the festival stalls outside. During the break, Izuku enjoyed some snacks he had brought from the stands, accompanied by Todoroki, Inesa, and Hitoshi. Observers likely noted how different Izuku appeared now compared to an hour ago. He had reverted to his more playful self, shedding the competitive demeanor he had earlier. People whispered among themselves, questioning what had happened and recalling the fear they had seen in his eyes moments before. Izuku seemed to radiate an aura reminiscent of Akashi from Kuroko no Basket. As break time neared its end, the official one-on-one battles were set to begin following the unofficial matches. The teachers organized these unofficial bouts for those who did not qualify for the official rounds. This was a school sports festival after all, and everyone deserved a chance to enjoy it. With the unofficial matches completed, it was time for the qualifiers to enter the stadium. There were 16 students in total, and if the pairings went as Izuku predicted, he and his friends would face off against each other in the final rounds. Midnight welcomed everyone to the official final event of the sports festival, and the crowd erupted in cheers, eager to see the quirks in action. Unfortunately, some would not have the opportunity to showcase their abilities. Midnight reiterated the rules before the matches began. Present Mike announced Izuku's name, and he dashed out from the tunnel entrance, followed by Juzo Hananuki from Class B, who had the quirk of softening. Earlier, Izuku had witnessed him soften the ground, creating a quicksand-like effect. Juzo had teamed up with Kendo, Tetsu, and Ibara Shiozaki, earning them the 3rd spot for qualifiers. Juzo could have easily won by trapping his opponent in the softened ground, but that was not the case. As the signal sounded, both boys activated their quirks. To Juzo's surprise, no quicksand effect occurred. Stammering in shock, he looked at Izuku, who had transformed from a playful child into a confident competitor. Izuku smiled and explained that he preferred to engage in hand-to-hand combat on equal terms. Present Mike excitedly announced that Izuku had immediately cancelled his opponent's quirk, showcasing the skills inherited from his father, the underground hero Eraserhead. The crowd buzzed with excitement, and Miss Joke expressed her disbelief at the revelation of Eraserhead having a son. However, everyone quickly refocused on the match. In this one-on-one combat, Juzo's reliance on his long-range quirk proved to be his downfall, as Izuku skillfully cornered him out of bounds. While some might label Izuku as a cruel mastermind, he refrained from knocking down a weaker opponent, hoping that Juzo would recognize the importance of training without relying solely on his quirk. If Juzo learned from this experience, Izuku considered him a potential strong opponent for the following year. The Greenette advanced by relying on his combat skills rather than his quirk, a strategy that many of his opponents lacked. Hitoshi also excelled in combat, often winning even when his quirk didn't work, thanks to his logical thinking and ability to provoke others. Inasa utilized his powerful whirlwind to push opponents out of bounds, while Shoto focused on freezing his enemies in place. Together, they emerged as the final contenders in the event. In the locker room, Hitoshi contemplated his strategy for the upcoming fight against Todoroki. He felt nervous. If he could win this round, it would be enough to secure his place in the hero course. While Izuku, Inasa, and Shoto had supported him in reaching this point, they also expected him to demonstrate his own effort and determination. Of course, they would not hold back on Hitoshi. They may want him in the hero course, but they also wanted to win and showcase their pride. Hitoshi sighed as he thought about the situation. While trying to concentrate, Izuku found himself intrigued by Shiozaki's quirk, which she referred to as vines. It was a powerful quirk, and she knew how to use it effectively. Izuku realized that if he faced her with a different quirk, she would likely have the upper hand. He noted her strategic thinking, especially how she had used her vines as a shield against Denki's quirk. As he continued to ponder, his classmates poked him on the shoulder, laughing. Ochako pointed out that he was muttering again, to which Izuku apologized, explaining that it was not every day he got to see the quirks from other classes. Ida, whose phone rang at that moment, excused himself to take the call in a quieter area away from the crowd and arena. Izuku and Aizawa sat together, waiting for the next match to start. Izuku began analyzing both competitors. He noted that Shoto had an ice quirk and would likely overuse it if he couldn't catch Hitoshi. He speculated that Shoto would eventually have to rely on his fire side, though he doubted he would do so. As for Hitoshi, Izuku recognized his good reflexes and how the capture tape could be a significant advantage. He believed Hitoshi could easily avoid Shoto's ice attacks, and over time, Shoto would tire himself out. Izuku thought that if Shoto kept talking, it would lessen his chances of winning. His mutterings caught the attention of not only his classmates but also the nearby heroes. The fight began as Present Mic called for Hitoshi and Shoto to start. Midnight signaled the start of the match. As expected, Shoto unleashed ice toward Hitoshi. Most spectators anticipated Shoto's victory as he continued to attack while Hitoshi skillfully dodged. Hitoshi's right side began to show signs of frostbite, and Izuku sighed from the sidelines, realizing that Hitoshi would not win this way. He explained to those around him that Hitoshi had a lot of stamina and excellent parkour reflexes, capable of enduring fights for an entire day, even without sleep. He noted that Shoto was not giving his all and was only using half of his abilities, which was revealing his weaknesses early on. Some agreed with Izuku's assessment, while others did not. As the fight dragged on, Izuku found it rather dull and felt compelled to intervene. From Hitoshi's perspective, 5 minutes had passed, and he was still dodging Shoto's ice attacks. He acknowledged that Shoto Todoroki was stronger but felt he only needed to work harder to keep up. He thought that if Shoto continued at this pace, the battle might soon turn in his favor. Hitoshi smirked as he dodged another attack, feeling that Shoto was not taking him seriously. With each passing moment, Hitoshi noticed Shoto's attacks slowing down and more frostbite forming on his right side. Despite the cold, Hitoshi used Shoto's ice to his advantage, sliding and hiding behind it. He was growing bored and hoped Shoto would drop his guard. Just then, Izuku's voice rang out from the crowd, catching Shoto's attention. He shouted that Shoto would never win like this, emphasizing that it was his quirk, not Hitoshi's. Hitoshi scowled at Izuku, feeling frustrated that he had made things more challenging. Hitoshi heard Shoto mutter a thank you, which only fueled his annoyance. He pointed out that Shoto was just like his father, prompting Shoto to unleash his flames in response. In the heat of the moment, Shoto angrily denied the comparison. Hitoshi seized the opportunity to use his quirk, causing Shoto to momentarily lose focus. He instructed Shoto to run out of bounds while dodging everything in his path. The announcement came swiftly. Hitoshi had won the match, securing third place. He reflected on the upcoming challenges, knowing he would face either Inasa, Bakugo, or Izuku next. Winning against Shoto had been a slide of luck, and he wondered how he would fare against Izuku, who could erase quirks, or Inasa, who likely wouldn't fall easily. The fight between Inasa and Bakugo concluded faster than expected, with Inasa using his strong wind to push Bakugo out of bounds. Bakugo, dissatisfied with his defeat, required Midnight's intervention to calm him down. Hitoshi sighed from the sidelines, realizing it would be him against Inasa. As Izuku observed the scene, he noted that Inasa and Hitoshi were given a few minutes to prepare before their match. Whoever won would face him next. Izuku felt confident that he could defeat Inasa as long as he activated his quirk first. However, he acknowledged that if Hitoshi managed to win against Inasa, he would have a chance in close combat, though he doubted Hitoshi would overcome someone he had faced many times before. Izuku checked on Shoto, who had unfortunately passed out from overexerting himself. Returning to the crowd, he received praise from some, which made him feel a bit sheepish. The match was about to begin again, with Hitoshi and Inasa waiting for Midnight's signal. When the match commenced, Hitoshi quickly lost, as Inasa didn't give him a chance to speak or taunt. A whirlwind, lighter than usual but still powerful enough, sent Hitoshi out of bounds. Izuku sighed, acknowledging that at least Hitoshi had made it to the hero course. After a brief break, the final match was set to begin, and Izuku felt confident about his victory. A familiar figure with purple hair entered the room, wearing a grin. Izuku, Inasa, and Shoto perked up, showing their excitement. Their teacher, Aizawa, introduced Hitoshi Shinso, the third placer in the sports festival. Hitoshi raised his hand and let it fall, mimicking Izuku's earlier introduction. He greeted the class casually. Izuku, thrilled to see his friend, rushed over and hugged him tightly, prompting Hitoshi to comment quietly about Izuku's childishness. After returning the hug, they were interrupted by Aizawa, who instructed everyone to take their seats. Hitoshi was assigned to sit behind Izuku, while Momo was moved to another spot. Once the seating arrangements were settled, Aizawa announced that the list of agencies and scouted students had arrived. Plus, quieted down, focusing on him. He congratulated Izuku for gathering many agencies, and noted that Inasa, Shoto, and Bakugo had received numerous requests as well. When he turned to Hitoshi, he mentioned that many underground heroes had expressed interest in him. A subtle shock crossed Hitoshi's face, but he quickly composed himself. As the class examined the list, they noticed All Might's agency listed under Izuku's name. Excitement filled the room as everyone marveled at the news. Izuku sighed and handed his list to his father, stating that he had already made his choice. His classmates assumed he had picked All Might's agency, and they cheered him on. Curious about when they would start, Izuku asked Aizawa. The teachers smirked and informed them that training would begin the following night, from 11 until 7 in the morning. This revelation shocked the class, except for Inasa, Shoto, and Hitoshi, who seemed to have anticipated it. Izuku tilted his head in confusion as Bakugo exclaimed about All Might's invitation. Izuku explained that his fighting style differed from All Might's, and that Aizawa had his training schedule, which just needed to be upgraded. Aizawa then mentioned that Midnight would be joining them to assist with hero names. Just then, Midnight burst into the room, greeting the class enthusiastically. Izuku had to intervene when Kaminari became overly excited. Midnight attempted to hug Izuku, who playfully pushed her away, expressing his affection and willingness to accept more gifts. Aizawa, wrapped in his sleeping bag, feigned ignorance about the situation, only to quickly fall asleep again. Midnight announced that she would help the students with their hero names, sparking excitement among them. Izuku, however, felt troubled as he realized he hadn't thought of a hero name yet. He contemplated a name similar to Eraserhead but worried about the teasing he would receive from his father and aunt. He mused that it didn't matter much since he intended to be an underground hero anyway. He considered asking his classmates for suggestions, but hesitated, fearing their ideas might not be suitable. As he pondered, he noticed Hitoshi deep in thought and doubted he would receive any help from him. Inasa's suggestions seemed too military-like, and Izuku sighed, resting his head on his desk while his classmates brainstormed. Suddenly, a name caught his attention: Lord Explosion Murder. He questioned its suitability as a hero name, and Midnight promptly rejected it. Bakugo, frustrated, returned to his seat, muttering to himself. Meanwhile, Bakugo was irritated that the teachers wouldn't accept his hero name, which he believed sounded cool. He recalled that even a younger Izuku had agreed with him. As he continued to think of names, one finally struck him: Ground Zero. He silently declared it and prepared to present it when his turn came, hoping it would be accepted. When he was 4, he had a friend who was different from the others, who only surrounded him for his powerful quirk. He realized this late, noticing the sincerity in his friend's admiration. Izuku Midoriya was labeled quirkless by adults, and the other kids believed it, leading them to make fun of him. This year, he met someone who resembled Midoriya closely. From the green curls to the freckles and emerald eyes, even the first name fit perfectly. At first, he was convinced it was Midoriya, but this new boy had a quirk. Regardless, he vowed that once he graduated from this school, he would find that nerd. Rankings didn't matter to him. And that was how he ended up with Ground Zero. He thought it was frustrating that Aizawa was wasting such an opportunity by rejecting All Might's agency. He looked over the list of agencies set up for him and then focused on Best Genius Agency. It seemed like the best option, especially with an offer from the number 4 hero. He hoped he wouldn't waste his time. In class, Izuku joked about naming himself Eraserhead Jr., which made everyone laugh. He tilted his head, confused, as he noticed that Izuku was seriously considering it. He asked if he had missed something, but the others just waved him off. Shota thought to himself that for a smart kid, Izuku lacked common sense. He told Izuku to take things seriously, but Izuku insisted he was serious. Hitoshi snorted at Izuku's antics as he stubbornly held onto the idea of the name. Shota felt a wave of nostalgia as he remembered the innocent child who just wanted to be cherished, wondering what had happened to him. Despite his thoughts, he mumbled a stubborn remark about Izuku being a problem child. Nemuri pouted and continued with her work. After everyone finished, she called out to Izuku. He walked to the front, unsure if he should really use the name. Taking a deep breath, he revealed a board that read Eraserhead Jr. The class exclaimed in surprise, and Izuku smiled, quickly revealing another board with a different name. The next day, Aizawa informed the class that they would be going to school in the morning to see if they were satisfied with their chosen agencies. They could attend in the afternoon. It was now time for internships, and Hitoshi and Izuku were with Aizawa, having just dropped off their classmates at the train station. Aizawa grinned, which Hitoshi was still getting used to. They would train until 4 in the afternoon, then sleep until 9 in the evening before preparing for patrol. The boys groaned at the thought of waking up so early. Aizawa glared at them, questioning if they were being lazy. They protested, asking if they really had to sleep until 9. Aizawa smirked at their confidence, challenging them to stay awake during the patrol. The boys quickly shook their heads, regretting their earlier bravado. They went to Yue's forest surrounding the facility to train their quirks and bodies. Hitoshi was tasked with reading psychological texts to help him with his capture scarf. Izuku and Hitoshi often raced with Aizawa, swinging from tree to tree, though sometimes Hitoshi would get stuck in his own scarf. Combat training was part of their routine, and during lunch breaks, they would doze off while eating, prompting Hisashi to wake them up a few times. After finishing their training, they slept until 9, eagerly anticipating patrol. Aizawa woke them up, instructing them to get dressed. The boys quickly changed into their hero costumes. Aizawa handed them hot cocoa with a bit of caffeine to keep them alert, courtesy of Yamada Hisashi. He told them it was for their hard work earlier. Drank the cocoa before heading out, and Aizawa noticed the effects kicking in. As they followed their teacher into an alley, they used their capture scarves to pull themselves up to high ground, jumping from rooftop to rooftop. Aizawa gave them tips as they searched for activities. Suddenly, they heard a scream. Aizawa instructed them to follow the sound and engage, but without using their quirks, even Izuku. They arrived at an alley where a wealthy-looking woman was cornered by muggers. Aizawa explained that this type of occurrence was common, and they needed to get used to such situations. He called out the names of the muggers, readying them for battle. The class was happy to be back from their 1-week internships, grateful that their classmates had survived the stain incident. Apparently, Shinso and Aizawa had been patrolling the area. Aizawa had noticed Ida's reason for coming to Hosu. Besides, Shinso would be a perfect match for the hero killer, just in case he was needed. Everyone was chatting about their stories and experiences. Bakugo was being laughed at by Kirishima, Siro, and Denki, his hair styled in the gelled look best Genist had given him. The frustrated Bakugo kept shouting complaints and other exclamations. Ochako called out to Shinso, prompting him to look her way. She asked where Izuku was, and the thought of Izuku made Shinso chuckle until he heard the door open, revealing a very tired Aizawa. He looked even more exhausted than usual, and everyone in class could agree on that. They fell silent as Aizawa grumbled about something, clearly not in the best mood, so it was best to give him some space. Aizawa moved his hands as if holding a mug, but when he pretended to take a sip, there was nothing there but air. He groaned and sighed, taking a breath. He then asked Shinso to get him coffee from the faculty room. Shinso complied, admitting that what Aizawa had done was more tiring than patrolling. As he walked through the halls, he reached the faculty room door and opened it, only to find a young boy hugging his leg. The boy chanted excitedly, calling him Toshi-ni. Hitoshi picked up the toddler, surprised to see Izuku there. In another moment, 3 muggers surrounded a wealthy-looking lady. Using his capture scarf, Izuku pulled the lady away from the 3 criminals as Aizawa and Shinso jumped into action. 2 of the muggers showed signs of quirks, but Aizawa managed to erase both of their abilities due to the narrow space in the alley. One, however, did not display any quirks. After ensuring the victim was safe and calling the police, Aizawa and Hitoshi focused on the 2 attackers, forgetting about the third. Once they knocked out the 2, they turned around to see the last mugger sneaking up on Izuku, who was caught before Aizawa could react. Shinso rushed to the villain and subdued him, and Aizawa was certain he had erased the mugger's quirk. They secured the criminals with quirk-canceling cuffs just as the police arrived. However, they turned to Izuku and noticed he was crying and appeared much smaller. So this was the third mugger's quirk. Recovery Girl reassured Aizawa that Izuku would be fine and that the quirk would wear off in 2 weeks, likening it to when he first arrived at the school. Aizawa asked about Izuku's memories, and Recovery Girl suggested he ask the boy his age to understand better. Aizawa approached Izuku, who was being entertained by Shinso, and asked him how old he was. The boy looked up with bright green eyes and held up 4 fingers. When Aizawa asked what the last thing he remembered was, Izuku exclaimed that he and his mother were about to watch a hero movie with Kaken, mentioning that Toshi-ni had played heroes with him. Aizawa sighed, realizing this memory was from before he had met Izuku. He hoped the boy was still the same as he had been back then. Suddenly, Izuku's expression changed, and he frowned, calling out for Kaken. Tears began to stream down his face as he cried out for his friend. Aizawa remembered how clingy Izuku had been in the past and hugged him tightly, reassuring him that he was there. He told Izuku he was his dad, and the boy looked up, his tears starting to slow. He tilted his head and asked if he could stay with Aizawa for a while since his mother had work. Izuku's excitement at meeting his dad for the first time brought a smile to Aizawa's face. Hitoshi, however, mockingly questioned what had happened to Izuku to make him like this. Aizawa glared at him, asking if he was implying it was his fault. Hitoshi reminded him that Papa Zashi had said Aizawa was his favorite. Aizawa sighed and picked up Izuku, thanking Recovery Girl as they left the clinic. He pondered how to tell Mike without him getting overly excited and using his quirk to squeal. Hitoshi commented that he didn't think that was possible, and Aizawa suggested they stop by a store to buy earplugs. When they arrived, Izuku nuzzled his face against Hitoshi's chest, announcing that he had come with them because Daddy said no one was home. Hitoshi noticed Zashi and Nemuri recording on their phones and asked them to delete it, but they refused. He sighed, feeling a sense of rivalry with Aizawa. Zashi handed Aizawa his coffee, and just as he was about to leave, he felt a tug on his pants. Looking down, he saw Izuku with pleading eyes, asking if he could come along. Hitoshi suggested Izuku stay with Zashi, but the boy insisted he wanted to be with Aizawa, starting to cry. Hitoshi thought about how spoiled Izuku had become, realizing it might be Zashi's and Nemuri's influence. Reluctantly, Hitoshi decided to bring Izuku along, carrying him in one arm while holding the coffee in the other. He walked through the halls and reached the classroom door, entering to find his classmates staring at them. He announced that they were wondering where Midoriya was, and the room gasped as the girls began to squeal. Hitoshi handed Aizawa his coffee, apologizing for the delay due to dealing with a tantrum. Izuku jumped down, falling onto his bottom but quickly standing up to hug Aizawa. Aizawa greeted him warmly as the class erupted with compliments about how cute Izuku was. However, one student remained unusually quiet, Bakugo Katsuki, who was typically more vocal. The class looked at Izuku with admiration, unaware of the shock that had overtaken Bakugo. They watched as the little green-haired boy giggled at his father, and a rare, gentle smile appeared on Aizawa's face. Shiro remarked that they should savor the moment while it lasted, while Mina quietly snapped a picture in a stealthy manner. Then, Izuku spoke up again, his voice filled with emotion as he asked when they would see Kaken. The boy's eyes glistened with unshed tears, drawing everyone's attention. Bakugo snapped out of his shock, realizing that only one person called him that. Shinso explained that Izuku kept asking about Kaken, but they didn't know who that was. Bakugo's name slipped from his lips without thinking. Izuku turned to look at the ash blonde, recognizing him instantly despite the changes in his appearance. Even though Bakugo was taller and more mature now, Izuku would never forget that spiky ash blonde hair and those striking red eyes. With a gasp of realization, Izuku jumped off Aizawa and ran to Bakugo, cheering with excitement. The class was taken aback to see Bakugo, usually so stoic, tearing up and hugging someone. It seemed that Izuku was indeed Bakugo's childhood friend, and he had a cute nickname for him. Reflecting on past events, it became clear that Bakugo had been searching for his childhood friend, who had been quirkless. This friend had clearly made a significant impact on Bakugo's life, motivating him to become a hero despite his impatience. Izuku exclaimed how amazing Kaken was, marveling at how big he had grown. He excitedly reminded Bakugo about their plans to choose hero names. Bakugo chuckled at Izuku's enthusiasm and suggested that he would be called King Explosion, which made the class realize where Bakugo had gotten that idea. Izuku pointed out that adding murder at the end wouldn't be very heroic, causing Bakugo to sigh in response. They agreed to come up with a new name together. Aizawa, ready to start the lesson, instructed Bakugo to take care of Izuku while he spoke. Despite Aizawa's lecture, the whispers and giggles from Izuku and Bakugo filled the room. Aizawa didn't mind, as they were trying to keep it quiet and Izuku was clearly enjoying himself. Suddenly, Izuku shouted that dynamite was awesome, interrupting the class. Embarrassed, he shrank back, but Aizawa reassured him that it was okay. He then suggested that the two of them go to the cafeteria and ask Lunch Rush to make them some katsudon. Izuku eagerly agreed, pulling Bakugo along. In the cafeteria, they enjoyed their katsudon and pork cutlets while Bakugo entertained young Aizawa. The rest of the class soon gathered around them, and Izuku shyly hid in Bakugo's chest. Bakugo emphasized that they were friends, even if his words weren't entirely sincere. Deep down, everyone knew Bakugo considered them friends, despite his pride and ego. Izuku looked up at Bakugo, seeking reassurance about their classmates. Bakugo confirmed that they were indeed good friends, which made Izuku smile brightly. As he interacted with the others, Bakugo remained focused on his studies, feeling irritated by their lack of seriousness. Kirishima and Kaminari were engaged in a conversation about sharing notes, which only added to Bakugo's frustration. He pointed out that they didn't even have biology class at their school, prompting laughter from those around him. Later, Hitoshi approached Bakugo, informing him that Aizawa wanted to see him. Bakugo followed the cousins to the teacher's faculty room. Aizawa asked Bakugo how he knew Izuku. Bakugo explained that their mothers had been best friends, which led to them becoming close until Izuku had gone missing at the age of 4. Aizawa felt a pang of regret for not asking Izuku about his old friends after taking him in. Bakugo reassured him that he was just glad Izuku was safe and happy, revealing that he wanted to become a hero because of a promise he made to Izuku. Aizawa encouraged Bakugo to visit whenever Izuku returned to normal. Bakugo then inquired about how Izuku had gained a quirk, having been told he was quirkless. Aizawa explained that Izuku's quirk was an upgraded version of his own, which had temporarily erased itself while preparing to manifest. Bakugo acknowledged that Izuku had been bullied for being quirkless, which might explain his jumpiness at times. He then expressed a desire to change his hero name, stating that Dynamite seemed better than Ground Zero to Izuku. Aizawa found it amusing but noted that it was a bit cheesy. Bakugo grumbled that as long as Izuku liked it, that was what mattered. Aizawa proceeded to update the files, suggesting that Hitoshi should also consider changing his hero name. Something easy to remember. Aizawa sighed at his nephew, expressing his concern. He explained that it was important for other heroes to easily contact him or think of him when they needed help. He suggested that Izuku could help with this, as he seemed more creative at this age. With that, Aizawa disappeared into his sleeping bag. Hitoshi looked at Izuku and realized he would be taking care of him now. Izuku, filled with excitement, chanted happily for his older brother, Toshi and Ai. Hitoshi then invited Bakugo to join them. Bakugo, confused, asked where they were going. Hitoshi replied that they were heading to their house. A retired hero asked Toshinori if he was certain about his choice of successor. Despite the unease he felt from his old teacher, All Might smiled and affirmed his decision. Last year, Toshinori encountered 3 boys. One was trapped in an abusive household, another had a hero for a father, and the third had faced a villain incident, defeating the villain on his own while the heroes stood by. Each boy presented a unique choice, but he could only select one. Izuku Aizawa, the son of Eraserhead, had impressed Toshinori since their first meeting a year ago, just before the new semester began. The boy continuously improved, showcasing the hero potential that Toshinori had once possessed. Despite his resemblance to Shota Aizawa, Izuku maintained a bright smile, reassuring those around him. However, his manipulative tendencies raised concerns. Toshinori had overheard a conversation that made him hesitant about Izuku's ambitions. In a secluded teacher's lounge, Izuku expressed his desire to become an underground hero, operating in the shadows of the renowned to infiltrate crime groups, act, and arrest them without any public record. He believed this path would allow him to prevent numerous crimes while receiving government support without joining an agency. This clarity of purpose made Toshinori wary, as he realized that giving Izuku such responsibility could be burdensome. He also worried about how Shota would react to the risks associated with Toshinori's quirk. A month or two later, a villain attack occurred. Toshinori managed to catch the villain initially, but it escaped, leading to the infamous sludge incident where a middle schooler defeated the villain using his own abilities. Katsuki Bakugo, a boy from a private school, was taken hostage during the incident. While the villain threatened him, the surrounding heroes hesitated, claiming their quirks were incompatible with the situation. Unable to bear it any longer, Katsuki rushed in to save the boy, using his explosive powers to subdue the villain, which earned him public admiration. Afterward, Toshinori met with Katsuki and inquired about his motivations for intervening. Katsuki revealed that he had a friend whose whereabouts were unknown, and despite being quirkless, his friend had shown him what it meant to be a true hero. Katsuki promised to become the best hero for him, stating that his body moved instinctively to help. Whoever had instilled these ideals in Katsuki had shaped him into a remarkable candidate for heroism, despite the anger issues that Toshinori would later discover during their time at UA. The third boy, Hitoshi Shinso, came into Toshinori's life 2 months before the UA entrance exams. His father was abusive and affiliated with a small-time villain organization, while his mother had passed away shortly after in a mysterious car accident. Toshinori and his team investigated the organization, which, although not as notorious as the League of Villains, posed a significant threat. Tsukachi had requested Toshinori to keep an eye on Hitoshi's father while patrolling the area. Hitoshi often defended his mother, enduring injuries in the process, and faced discrimination due to his quirk, which others labeled as villainous. Eventually, they apprehended Hitoshi's father and his associates. However, tragedy struck when Hitoshi's mother was involved in a car crash. She possessed a mental quirk that created illusions, complicating the investigation. Despite replaying the incident repeatedly, they could only classify it as homicide. Just as they were about to arrest the innocent driver involved, Hitoshi stepped forward, revealing the truth with a sorrowful expression. He insisted that it was a suicide, pleading not to arrest the man who had done nothing wrong. His bravery in speaking out led to therapy for him, and he managed to do well before the entrance exams. It was then they discovered he was Eraserhead's nephew, and he ended up in the general education course. Toshinori admired Hitoshi for not succumbing to society's wrongs or the notion that he would inevitably become a villain. He fought hard to be a hero despite the discrimination he faced. Hitoshi's courage in revealing the truth before anyone else could suffer was commendable, and Toshinori understood that the burden of speaking out about his father must have been overwhelming for him. Izuku and Hitoshi both aspired to be underground heroes, each with a clear vision of their paths. Katsuki Bakugo had drawn inspiration from young Izuku, whose ideals surprisingly mirrored Toshinori's own. With a chuckle, Toshinori concluded that young Bakugo would be his successor. He was determined to become the best hero and had the potential to embody the symbol of peace. Gran Torino, observing the conversation, recognized the qualities that Toshinori saw in the boy and smiled, affirming the decision. Chapter End. Hitoshi mentioned that Aizawa and Hisashi were staying late at school, prompting Bakugo to raise an eyebrow as Hitoshi unlocked the apartment door. He explained that Bakugo should come along because Izuku liked him and might struggle under Hitoshi's care. Hitoshi sighed when Bakugo pointed out that Izuku liked him too. Of course, Hitoshi acknowledged that Izuku liked him as his acting brother, but he questioned whether he could keep up with Izuku's energy. He knelt down, squeezing Izuku's cheeks and showcasing his slightly chubby face. Katsuki felt as if Izuku's emerald eyes were peering into his soul, making him feel softer than usual. Izuku suddenly asked if Bakugo would stay, which stirred a sense of guilt within him. Bakugo assured Izuku that he would stay. As they entered Izuku's home, the broccoli-haired boy lit up and bounced around. Bakugo was greeted by a cozy living room with a sofa, television, and a kitchen with a dining table for four, surrounded by cats. Hitoshi explained that Aizawa liked cats, having either adopted them from the street or received them as gifts from students hoping to curry favor. Izuku called out for Hitoshi, expressing his desire for udon. Hitoshi sighed, admitting he couldn't cook and suggested they have ramen while waiting for Aizawa to prepare katsudon. Izuku whined at the suggestion, prompting Bakugo to ask if they had ingredients. Hitoshi confirmed they were in the fridge and cabinets, leading Bakugo to declare that he would cook. Hitoshi was surprised, teasing Bakugo about his cooking skills. Bakugo explained that he could only make katsudon and curry, having learned to cook katsudon because Izuku loved it. Hitoshi smiled at Bakugo's dedication. As they prepared to cook, Izuku climbed onto one of the chairs, excitedly exclaiming that Bakugo was amazing for being able to cook. Bakugo responded with confidence, insisting that Izuku better eat well to keep up with him. Izuku expressed his desire to grow big like Bakugo and then added that he wanted to be like Hitoshi too. Hitoshi couldn't help but smile at Izuku's cuteness, while Bakugo teased Hitoshi about being called Nichan, prompting Hitoshi to puff out his chest proudly. Meanwhile, Izuku felt overwhelmed by the noise of Bakugo and Hitoshi's playful banter. A headache began to form, and he felt cold, leading him to cry out for Hitoshi. Both Bakugo and Hitoshi immediately grew concerned, lowering themselves to Izuku's level. Izuku sniffled and mentioned that he was in pain, placing a hand on his forehead. Hitoshi felt Izuku's forehead and realized he was burning up, suspecting that Izuku was sick. He picked Izuku up and asked Bakugo to cook curry instead, assuring him that there were ingredients available. As Hitoshi carried Izuku to his room, the young boy fell asleep in his arms. Shota Aizawa was halfway through his paperwork when he received a call from Hitoshi. His heart sank when he heard that Izuku was sick. Aizawa stood up, drawing the attention of his co-workers, and expressed his concern, recalling how rare it was for Izuku to fall ill. He instructed Hisashi to gather their paperwork so they could head home. Hisashi, worried, asked if something had happened. Aizawa explained that Izuku had a fever, which alarmed his colleagues, reminding them of past instances when Izuku had been sick. Aizawa contemplated whether he needed to call Hitoshi about using quirk-canceling cuffs on Izuku to ensure his safety. Izuku's illness lasted for 3 days, during which Recovery Girl took care of him at UA. Aizawa sighed, planning how to manage the remaining days, knowing that his students and Imuri would likely want to take care of Izuku. He also remembered that some alumni were scheduled to visit next week, hoping they would enjoy watching his class. In a different setting, a voice from the television addressed Tamura, causing unease among the other league members, though Shigaraki remained unfazed. The others left, understanding that privacy was needed. The voice revealed plans that involved a troublesome individual who needed to be eliminated. Tamura listened closely as the voice explained that this person, Izuku Aizawa, had a quirk that could threaten their future. The instruction was clear: either recruit him to the League of Villains or eliminate him entirely. Tamura responded affirmatively, ready to follow the directive. Friday was a rest day for Aizawa, who decided to let his class take care of Izuku. To his surprise, the day was not as chaotic as he had anticipated. The main issue was the ongoing rivalry between Bakugo and Hitoshi, who couldn't stop teasing each other. Bakugo would shout at Hitoshi, and Hitoshi would respond in kind, both competing for Izuku's affection. Aizawa, nestled in his sleeping bag, thought to himself that he was surely Izuku's favorite. As the day progressed, the competition between Bakugo and Hitoshi settled down, and they all ended up spoiling Izuku over the weekend. Nemuri, Zashi, Hitoshi, Cementos, Ectoplasm, and even All Might joined in, with Aizawa indulging Izuku the most. Eventually, Izuku returned to his usual self, albeit embarrassed by all the cute things he had done. More importantly, he had rekindled his friendship with Bakugo. Although Todoroki and Inasa were not compatible with Bakugo, they all agreed to set aside their differences for Izuku's sake. The week was designated for studying for the upcoming exams, and rumors circulated that there would be a reward for the students during summer break. Naturally, everyone was excited. On a Monday, All Might summoned Izuku and Bakugo to a lounge. As they entered, Izuku asked if he had been called. All Might confirmed that he wanted to discuss his power with young Aizawa. After Izuku nodded in acknowledgement, All Might expressed his desire for Bakugo to become his successor. This revelation puzzled Bakugo, who questioned why he was needed. All Might explained that Izuku could help Bakugo manage his anger issues, even though he believed Bakugo could handle it on his own. Bakugo, curious, asked for clarification on what being a successor entailed. After All Might detailed the basics of One for All, Bakugo found himself in a difficult position. He wanted to accept the role of successor but felt overwhelmed by the legacy of All Might, the achievements, the enemies, and the expectations. He aspired to surpass All Might but realized the weight of that ambition. Izuku, sensing Bakugo's hesitation, encouraged him, declaring that he would be the perfect hero and offering his support. This reassurance eased some of Bakugo's worries, though he remained silent for a moment. Izuku continued to express his confidence in Bakugo's abilities, surprising him with his unwavering belief. Finally, Bakugo declared that he would accept All Might's power and work on lowering his pride to accept help. All Might recognized Bakugo's nature and high standards but also saw his determination to become an even greater hero. Seizing the moment, All Might handed Bakugo a strand of his hair, prompting both boys to react in disbelief. Izuku, imagining a more dramatic way to pass on the power, couldn't help but laugh at the thought of Bakugo chewing on the hair. Bakugo, refusing to eat it, shouted in protest, but Izuku insisted he had to. In the end, Bakugo reluctantly gulped down the strand of hair, leading to Izuku teasing him relentlessly about the incident. Bakugo, frustrated, grumbled as he left school, wishing for a return to the younger Izuku instead of the teasing version. Later, Aizawa inquired about All Might's meeting, having heard the commotion. Izuku explained that All Might had chosen Bakugo as his successor. Aizawa found it amusing that Izuku had taken to calling Bakugo Kaken again, though he knew he would get used to it. Aizawa remarked that the situation could be challenging, to which Izuku playfully countered that Aizawa without coffee for a week would be more difficult. They both sighed as Izuku assisted Aizawa with school papers in the dining area, while Hitoshi and Mike decided to hang out at the mall. After finishing their tasks, Aizawa carried a sleepy Izuku to bed, who had dozed off while helping. Hizashi and Hitoshi returned just as Aizawa was tidying up. Hitoshi, who had fallen asleep on Hisashi's back after resting on a park bench, prompted Aizawa to comment on the consequences of staying up too late. The following day after school, there was a training session for Bakugo with all might, while Izuku watched. He understood that the power was immense and felt it was his responsibility to help Bakugo manage it. With Hitoshi occupied with his old classmates, Izuku had the afternoon free while waiting for his dad's. He called out to Bakugo from the sidelines, urging him to calm down, warning that his anger might cause the power to overflow. The wind whipped around them as Bakugo's fingers were injured, and fallen trees marked the path of his explosive energy. Izuku noted that Bakugo needed to learn how to control the percentage of his power, but he remained optimistic, encouraging Bakugo that this was a good start. Bakugo responded with a grin, appreciating Izuku's support. Kaken had been training all week, and it was exhausting for Izuku since he was the one supervising him whenever All Might was occupied with classes or teacher duties. While he sometimes found Kaken annoying, he also enjoyed teasing him. In truth, Kaken was good company. During that same week, they studied for the upcoming exams before summer break. As the week progressed, they participated in a student versus teacher exercise. With the help of teamwork from Yaoyorozu, they managed to defeat Shota. Izuku's dream of defeating his father in a match felt distant. He couldn't even land 6 hits during a sparring session that could last for hours. The sparring match often felt more like a dodging practice for his father, who managed to evade almost every attack flawlessly. Izuku huffed in annoyance at the thought, realizing he still had much to improve. Most of the class passed the exercise, but many of Kaken's friends did not. Izuku heard his father mention that they would face consequences, but he shrugged it off, knowing it meant remedial lessons at night. Those sessions would likely continue until morning, followed by a grueling training session the next day. He had witnessed what his father's past students endured, and it was no easy feat. Right now, Papa Zashi was making sure everything was ready for me to pack in my bag. Toshi was there with Dad, enjoying their coffee. He mentioned that he had already packed, just like Dad. I was busy putting my clothes into the duffel bag and occasionally pulling the cat away from trying to sneak into it. Fuzzy was certainly clingy. Sometimes, Dad would get a bit annoyed with the cat, but I wasn't sure who he was actually jealous of. I was starting to wonder if he loved the cats more than me. Eventually, when I finished packing, I headed to the couch for what I intended to be a quick nap. Papa, however, had other plans. Before I could even drift off, he pulled me off the couch and carried me to the car. It seemed he was driving today. I thanked him with a yawn, feeling a sense of comfort whenever he treated me like a child. He carried me to the back seat as if I were still 5, which probably looked amusing by now. Dad and Toshi followed us. I found my head resting on Toshi's lap. Hitoshi felt like a big brother to me, although I was starting to question his claims about his age and birthday. He was taller and appeared more mature than I was. My earlier guess about growing taller in the future didn't seem to hold up now, as I was one of the smaller kids in class. We soon arrived at school, and a few of my classmates were already walking in. Yaoyorozu was always the first to arrive, and she was there, walking ahead of us. We were earlier than usual, and I wondered if Papa and Dad had some teacher duties to attend to before we went inside. Izuku usually found ways to feel comfortable, but he was unsure how to ease the tension between Shochan and Kaken. Inasa and Hitoshi decided to leave Izuku to handle this problem on his own and sat far away from them. Todoroki told Bakugo that he was too explosive to be around. Bakugo insisted that Izuku was friends with him first and had every right to be there. Shoto sighed at Bakugo's response, reminding him that he had spent more time with Izuku. The argument continued, and Izuku sighed, realizing that neither of them was listening to his attempts to stop them. He put on his earphones and turned the volume up high, though the small sound still reached the arguing boys. Bakugo commented that Izuku would go deaf, while Todoroki asked him to lower the volume. Izuku sighed again and paused his music, stopping the muffled noise. He glared at his 2 friends, looking from one to the other. He wondered why Dad hadn't scolded them yet and muttered that he didn't mind Kaken being there, but he wanted Shochan to stay with him too. All he wanted was some sleep, and if they couldn't manage that, they could sit on the floor. He would happily use the seats as a bed. Shoto nodded in response and offered a short but sincere apology. Bakugo glared at Shoto while relaxing his face at the young Aizawa. Izuku let out a relieved sigh and leaned back, closing his eyes. He thought about how he didn't understand why they hated each other so much, unaware of the true cause of their conflict. Hitoshi laughed at the scene, having possibly started a competition over who was Izuku's best friend. He knew both boys were sensitive and determined when it came to that topic. The bus came to a stop, and everyone thought they were there for another bathroom break, but they were mistaken. Even Izuku didn't expect what was coming. When the wild pussycats introduced themselves, he quickly told everyone to return to the bus. Unfortunately, they didn't make it back and ended up sliding down the cliff due to Pixie Bob's quirk. Entering the beast forest, filled with dirt creatures, Koji attempted to communicate with them, but they were merely made of dirt and not real animals. Passing through the forest felt like hiking, and Izuku used his quirk to clear away the dirt beasts created by Pixie Bob's quirk. They managed to get through in about an hour, or maybe even less. Aizawa and the rest of the pussycats arrived at the location only to find the entire class waiting after a brief 2-minute delay. Aizawa groaned, realizing he had forgotten about Izuku. He muttered in annoyance that they had forgotten his son. When asked about him, Aizawa nodded and sighed, explaining that since there hadn't been any training but just a hike, they would have to do extra training after lunch. He placed the blame on Izuku for not predicting the outcome of his actions. Everyone turned to look at their green-haired classmate with silent glares. Tension filled the air as Izuku whined that it was their fault for forgetting him. Aizawa reminded him that the test was meant to practice teamwork, quirk usage, and critical thinking. He expressed pride in Izuku but noted that he could have reminded him that he had already taken the test 6 times. Most of the classmates exclaimed in surprise at this revelation. Shoto and Hitoshi were not surprised, as they both knew Izuku had practically grown up at UA rather than at Aizawa and Hizashi's actual apartment. Aizawa instructed everyone to go eat lunch, emphasizing that they needed to put up the fire and cook the raw meats. He made sure there were vegetables, skis, and sauce available so Izuku could prepare his katsudon. In a different setting, Shigaraki expressed his frustration as Toga had been repeating the same questions since the previous day. She was overly excited for the upcoming attack, eager to see cute boys, which was typical for a high school girl. Shigaraki reminded everyone to target the Bakugo kid, believing that if they captured him, the green-haired boy would naturally come to them. Dabi, in a bored tone, commented that Shigaraki really needed lotion. The atmosphere was tense, but Kurogiri was there to prevent any serious conflicts from arising. Dabi dropped his empty glass on the counter and walked away, casually mentioning that he would be excited to see another brat. The room fell silent, the tension between Shigaraki and Dabi still lingering, while Kurogiri sighed and continued with his tasks. The class paused their training, much to their advisor's dismay, as they turned their attention to Izuku and Aizawa engaged in a one-on-one match. Aizawa, while busy with Izuku, couldn't reprimand the onlookers. Izuku was utilizing every tool at his disposal, darting from tree to tree, throwing smoke bombs to obscure his movements. Aizawa sighed, realizing that the students might as well learn from the demonstration. Hitoshi hushed the class, understanding the need for concentration. He reminded them to keep quiet, explaining that such matches required intense focus. Jiro asked if Hitoshi had experience with this type of training. He admitted that he had tried it once but couldn't last long. Hitoshi elaborated on the nature of the match, explaining that Aizawa and Izuku were not solely relying on their quirks. They had learned to adapt, especially since many of their encounters involved mutant quirks that Aizawa couldn't erase and that could cause serious harm. HQ noted that Izuku had used similar tactics during a previous encounter at USJ, to which Toshi clarified that it had been an emergency situation. The students watched in awe as Aizawa executed movements reminiscent of a ninja, throwing what appeared to be shurikens. Shoto reflected on Izuku's strength as he observed him nearly land a hit on Aizawa, moving swiftly through the trees. Kirishima admired Izuku's training, recognizing how it had sharpened his senses and quickened his thinking. Aizawa, after catching Izuku in a simple trap, noted that Izuku often focused too much on complex challenges and overlooked the straightforward ones. Despite Aizawa's stern tone, Izuku beamed with determination, proud of his progress. Aizawa then turned his attention to the watching class, reminding them that they were supposed to be training. He expressed his frustration at their distraction, prompting Kota to point out that the wild pussycats were also observing. Izuku greeted Kota, who had been hiding and playing video games, and reassured him that his quirk would come in time. As training continued, the afternoon brought the arrival of Class 1B with Vlad King. Monoma remarked on the intensity of 1A's training, while their advisor encouraged them to push their limits. Later, Izuku asked Kota how he enjoyed dinner, and the boy enthusiastically responded that it was delicious. Suddenly, one of the wild pussycats announced a test of courage, which elicited cheers from the students. However, those with extra classes protested, prompting Aizawa to intervene. As the students paired up for the test, 1A entered the forest while 1B waited to scare them. Izuku and Hitoshi chose to deviate from the path, hiding in the shadows to plan their approach. Laughter echoed through the trees, but it was soon interrupted by the sight of blue flames. Ida alerted one of the wild pussycats, who quickly organized a response to the potential threat. In the midst of the unfolding events, Aizawa received a message from Mandalay, confirming the presence of villains and urging him to take action. The girl speaking was interrupted by a hush, but it was clear they were there for Bakugo. Aizawa quickly grabbed his capture weapon from the table and rushed to Vlad King. He informed Vlad King that the camp was infiltrated and urged him to protect the students, especially Kota, the boy in the red hat. Aizawa stormed out, only to be confronted by trees engulfed in blue flames. He had heard about the villains infiltrating, but he hadn't anticipated it would be this severe. He thought to himself that he needed to reach Bakugo. Everyone was allowed to engage, and all were warned about the villain attack. When the announcement was made, both boys remained where they were. Hitoshi was lost in thought, while Izuku was busy scribbling in the dirt and carving something into the nearby trees. In the midst of the chaos, Hitoshi lost sight of Izuku. Just 3 seconds of distraction, and the boy had vanished. Hitoshi decided to search for the others, remembering they were advised not to be alone. However, Izuku was a different case. He couldn't waste time looking for someone who might be hiding in such a situation. Despite his desire to find his brother, Hitoshi trusted that Izuku had a plan, especially since the green-haired boy had carved an arrow indicating which direction he should take. He ran swiftly and soon encountered Aizawa. With another binding cloth in the teacher's hand, Hitoshi expressed his gratitude. He informed Aizawa that Izuku had acted on his own. Aizawa sighed, trying to manage the overwhelming worry he felt. He thought to himself that the boy better have a plan. As Aizawa scanned the area for the others, he noticed a small detail, a carved pattern in a tree. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was Morse code. He told Hitoshi that he had seen Todoroki and Bakugo nearby, dealing with a villain who controlled blue flames. He instructed Hitoshi to help them, mentioning that Tsuyu and Uraraka might be with the dangerous blonde that Shoji had mentioned. Hitoshi nodded and swung through the trees. Aizawa continued to follow the Morse code, and as he traced the carvings on the trees, he arrived at a relatively open area of dirt. There, he discovered drawings of Izuku's plans. Suddenly, it struck him, after seeing what Izuku had left, he understood that the villains wanted to take Izuku rather than Bakugo. He pondered how Izuku could have known this. Realizing the plan and memorizing Izuku's intentions, Aizawa quickly disrupted the drawings by shuffling dirt over them with his feet. He then went to assist the students, deciding to let Izuku follow through with his plan and hoping everything would work out as intended. As Izuku pulled Bakugo halfway through the portal, he emerged from the shadows of the trees just in time to push Bakugo away. The villain known as Shigaraki shouted that his plan had worked and that this was his game. The portal closed, leaving a quiet Aizawa, an irate Bakugo, a dejected Todoroki, and a shocked class behind. Uraraka expressed her concern for Aizawa, as all of them were worried about him the most. His son had just been taken by villains. Todoroki noticed something peculiar. While Aizawa was indeed worried, he seemed unusually calm. A small fever from Izuku would typically send Aizawa and Hisashi into a panic, making him irritable. Aizawa felt an overwhelming sense of fatigue. The lessons for the students who had struggled in his class had stretched late into the night, from 9 until 1 in the morning. They hadn't even begun the actual lessons yet, they were merely discussing the reasons behind their failures. Class 1B would join them later, and that was when the real training would commence. Aizawa noted that one of Lad King's students, Monoma, had also failed. He braced himself for the inevitable headache that would come from dealing with their antics. After only 4 hours of sleep, Aizawa woke his students for breakfast and to prepare for their quirk training. He called out to Izuku, who was the last to respond as the others were already engaged in their activities. Aizawa informed him that he would be training him in combat alongside Tiger. They would also be working on quirk training, utilizing Pixie Bob's dirt beasts to enhance his range in the forest. Aizawa planned for Izuku to practice swinging through the trees and even included a staring contest as part of the training regimen. Aizawa had meticulously crafted a training plan for Izuku, who aspired to be an underground hero. However, Aizawa noted that Izuku's growing charisma might complicate that goal. He was gaining popularity and seemed to enjoy being in the spotlight. Aizawa wouldn't discourage him from pursuing that path, but he hoped it wouldn't lead to too much time spent with the media. His thoughts shifted to another concern, Bakugo. It had been some time since Bakugo had received one for all, and with each passing day, he appeared to struggle more with the power. Izuku had noticed it too, and Aizawa wondered what had happened to the improvement he had expected. Izuku's voice broke through his thoughts, confirming his worries. He mentioned that Bakugo had expressed feeling as if the power was not calling to him. He had shared that he dreamed of people within what seemed to be the quirk denying him. Aizawa found this perplexing but tried to simplify the situation in his mind. It seemed that the quirk was resistant to Bakugo being the next holder. He decided it would be best to leave that issue for All Might to address. Aizawa then turned his attention back to Izuku, who was still lingering nearby. He questioned why Izuku hadn't moved along yet. Izuku, apologizing, dashed toward Tiger but not before Aizawa tossed him some quirk-canceling bracelets. Izuku thanked him enthusiastically. Aizawa knew that Izuku sometimes struggled with hand-to-hand combat, as his quirk would activate unexpectedly, leading to complications during training, especially when Nizu had joined their sparring session unexpectedly. With a sigh, Aizawa resolved to add extra running to Izuku's training later, ensuring that the day ahead would be both challenging and productive. Chapter End. Izuku Midoriya thought Shigaraki Tamura was a fool. It had been almost too easy. After spending a day pretending to be a villain manipulated by Shigaraki, his restraints were now free. He wandered around the bar, putting on an act to make it seem like he didn't want to leave, knowing that a hero might come looking for him. It had been 3 days since he was taken, and if his calculations were correct, the raid he had planned should be happening right about now. A knock echoed through the room, and a voice called out, announcing a pizza deal. The members of the League of Villains went on high alert. Internally, Izuku face-bombed, maintaining a look of confusion on his face. He thought it would have been better if they had just kicked the door down instead of alerting everyone. If Aizawa had followed the plan, his acting would not confuse the heroes. The door burst open, and chaos erupted as everyone prepared to attack. However, they were met with the perfect defense that Izuku had also orchestrated. He felt a sense of pride in claiming the credit for the plan. Soon, other heroes arrived, including All Might and Kamui Woods. He could hear Empty Lady and another hero, Best Jeanist, shouting in the distance. Kamui Woods ensnared the villains, including Izuku, for some unknown purpose. 3 days prior, shortly after Izuku Aizawa was taken, a meeting was held at UA. Principal Nizu listened intently as Aizawa explained the situation. Principal Nizu, Izuku has been taken, but he left plans and a note. I found it through Morse code in the forest. There were also drawings he made in the dirt. I had to destroy them, but I memorized what he was indicating, Aizawa explained. He continued, detailing how Hitoshi overheard a member of the league mentioning they were after Izuku, not Bakugo. They believed it would be better to go after Izuku to avoid immediate danger to Bakugo, who might be killed right away. Izuku's plan was to avoid suffering and torture by pretending to be a villain. Nizu smiled internally at this revelation. And what are the contents of that note? He asked, gesturing to the paper Izuku had left behind. Aizawa replied, Izuku outlined various possibilities. He has a tracker under the soles of his shoes, which he probably activated. Everything recorded should be saved on my phone and yours. Nizu raised an eyebrow. Since when did I have access to that? Aizawa shrugged. I'm not sure. He just wrote the details and instructions. I didn't even know about this. Mike took the note and read aloud a postscript thanking Hatsum and Momo, even if they didn't know what they had done. Nizu chuckled, thinking about Izuku's strong instincts. Aizawa continued, he also requested specific heroes and backup options in case anyone declined. Ectoplasm commented on Izuku's genius, while Aizawa internally debated whether his son was a genius or just reckless. At the bottom of the note, a small message caught his eye. This is my game. Something had gone wrong. Izuku realized he hadn't planned for this situation. All for One had arrived, saving the League from capture and now battling All Might. Tamura had quickly handed him over to Kurogyari at a nearby bar, and Izuku could see the fight unfold through a window. Tamura instructed Kurogyari to keep Izuku back, ensuring the heroes wouldn't have him as an ally if he changed his mind. Alone and panicking, Izuku searched for a plan. His thoughts drifted back to the USJ incident and a special move that could cancel quirks over a large area, but the drawback was a coma. He couldn't risk it yet, he didn't have all the information, and escaping would only lead him back to this. Please. Then he remembered his quirk. The cancellation cuffs had been off since yesterday, allowing him to use his power freely. What he witnessed surprised him. The misty figure before him transformed into a familiar blue-haired man from his father's pictures. Eraserhead was not prepared for this. He thought about Izuku and how he had contributed to saving All Might. All for One had shown himself, and Shigaraki had taken his son somewhere nearby. He could track Izuku's location and ran away from the battle, telling his colleagues he was going to retrieve his son. As All Might fought All for One, Kamui Woods and Lady dealt with other villains, along with Best Jeanist and Gran Torino. Aizawa entered the building and approached a door. He heard screams, but they were not Izuku's. Kicking the door open, he was shocked to see a familiar figure. Izuku was activating his quirk, and the man before him screamed in pain. After a moment, the man collapsed, likely having his quirk drained. Aizawa moved closer, muttering the name Oboro. Izuku confirmed his identity with a nod. Aizawa called for backup, and soon Hisashi and Namuri arrived with the police. Namuri panicked, asking if Izuku was okay. Hisashi shouted loudly, prompting Aizawa to use his quirk to quiet him down before Izuku could respond. I'm fine, Auntie, Izuku said, though he added that there were greater matters to address. Aizawa felt distressed, and Hisashi noticed. Sho, are you okay? He asked, but Aizawa only nodded, not convincing his friend. The police secured Kurogyari with quirk-canceling cuffs to prevent him from escaping, ensuring he wouldn't warp away like during the USJ incident. Meanwhile, Bakugo had sneaked away from the dorms, wearing grenades on his wrist. He was determined to save Deku, unaware of the chaos that awaited him. In the midst of battle, Bakugo encountered Half and Brainwash. He expressed his surprise at their presence, questioning what they were doing there. Brainwash huffed, stating they had come to save Izuku, while Half nodded in agreement, adding that the heroes were already on the move. Bakugo's attention was drawn to the screen, where he saw All Might and, surprisingly, All for One. He realized he needed to reach them quickly. All Might couldn't risk revealing his true form to everyone. Bakugo dashed away, leaving the two boys watching the television from the building. He searched for a way to get to the fight scene. Although he couldn't yet use One for All with full cowling as Izuku had taught him, he knew his quirk could enhance his explosions. It took immense effort for him to suppress his rage as he navigated through the rubble, positioning himself for an attack. Just as All for One was about to strike, Bakugo launched a massive explosion from his grenades, pulling the pin with confidence that it would cause some damage. Seizing the opportunity, All Might delivered a powerful punch to the enemy, while another hero joined in, delivering a fierce kick to the villain. Bakugo recognized Gran Torino and exclaimed his name, to which Gran Torino responded with surprise, questioning what Bakugo was doing there. Bakugo insisted he had come to help, muttering an apology for his tone. All for One stood back up, leaving Bakugo to wonder just how strong the villain was. All Might, touched by Bakugo's determination, felt the need to go all out. Bakugo muttered to himself that he would have to push his body to the limit, considering how he could incorporate explosions into his wind. He declared to All Might that he would leave if allowed to help just once, vowing to prove he could convince All Might to go plus ultra, despite his disdain for the motto. With that, he charged toward All for One, unleashing explosions to obscure the villain's vision. Once close enough, Bakugo combined a massive gust of wind with a giant explosion, affecting All for One and visibly damaging him. He quickly maneuvered away, using explosions to propel himself into the air, where he was caught by MT Lady. She complimented him on his performance as he caught his breath. With Bakugo out of the way, All Might was free to unleash his full power, whether or not his true form was revealed. Little did All for One know, All Might had significant support from an unexpected ally. Izuku sat quietly, tied to a chair, the silence in the room stretching on. Shigaraki, growing increasingly annoyed, expected the boy to be desperate for freedom, filled with fear and anger. Instead, Izuku remained eerily calm, which only frustrated the blue-haired villain further. In a moment of irritation, Shigaraki removed the muffling mask from Izuku's face. "It has been a few hours, and you're too quiet," Tamura remarked, but there was no response from the green-haired boy. A mischievous idea crossed his mind, and a smile crept onto his face. He threatened to disassemble Izuku piece by piece, but the boy's wide eyes filled with tears as he pleaded for mercy. Tamura's laughter echoed through the room, a chilling sound that filled the air. However, as he watched Izuku, something unexpected happened. The boy began to laugh. It started softly, but soon escalated into loud, manic laughter that unnerved even the League of Villains more than Shigaraki's own. Shigaraki took a step back, bewildered. The laughter was unlike anything he had encountered before. "What kind of villain is scared of a little laughter?" he exclaimed, trying to regain control of the situation. But Izuku continued to laugh, his amusement contrasting sharply with the tension in the room. Tamura, frustrated, prepared to retaliate, but something held him back. Izuku sensed that Shigaraki had been ordered not to harm him, at least not yet. Perhaps he could have a little fun at the villain's expense. "This is ridiculous. You need to understand what you can and cannot get away with. Your plan has already failed. You've made yourselves known as my captors." Izuku taunted, noticing the small reactions from the others. "You want to be feared and build an empire, yet you haven't learned anything from your mentor." His words stung, and Shigaraki felt a tick of irritation, but he ignored it. Izuku continued, "What kind of villain leader are you? Your underlings don't even fear you." He pouted playfully, relishing the discomfort he was causing. "You guys are so boring," Izuku complained, glancing at Toga, who had been unusually quiet. "Oh, I didn't notice you there, Blondie," he smirked at her. Toga perked up, excitedly discussing her knives and favorite people. "But won't you stab me?" Izuku asked with a teasing pout. Toga, caught off guard, hesitated. "Izuku-kun, would you really want that?" "But I can't," she replied, knife in hand. Dabi intervened, pulling Toga away. "Are you crazy? He's completely normal." Twice chimed in, and Izuku, growing tired of the situation, decided to keep pushing their buttons. He knew his taunts were leaving an impression on them. With each jab, Tamura's annoyance grew, and he felt increasingly inferior to Izuku's words. "What? I should just escape and take everyone out," Izuku said, addressing no one in particular. "Sorry, just the voices," he added with a chuckle, causing everyone to stiffen in confusion. "That's it. Sensei, this kid is crazy. I don't think he's a threat at all. He could join us. I'm sure he'd fit in. This kid is exactly what you've been looking for, a lunatic," Shigaraki exclaimed, throwing a tantrum at the screen. Izuku chuckled, "Villainy? I wonder how that would suit me." 3 days later, Izuku roamed freely, showing no signs of attempting to escape. He played with knives alongside Toga, nearly injuring himself multiple times, and engaged in conversations with Dabi about fake heroes, which intrigued the black-haired villain. As for Shigaraki, Izuku found the manchild's inability to keep quiet amusing, often overhearing snippets of his conversations with what Izuku guessed was all for one. "Sensei, the enemy is with us as an ally. I can't wait to see the looks on those NPCs." Izuku smirked at Shigaraki's words. Just then, a knock echoed through the room, signaling a new development. It seemed that Izuku had pushed himself too hard, stopping too many quirks at once. Recovery Girl explained to Aizawa that exhaustion had taken its toll on him, resulting in a fever and slight dehydration. The League of Villains had not taken care of him properly, but she reassured Aizawa that Izuku would be fine and would wake up, whether later or by the next day. Aizawa sighed, burdened by the many matters at hand. It was still the middle of the night, and the battle had just concluded an hour and a half ago. Sirens blared outside as people evacuated and were sent home. The injured were being attended to, and heroes were doing everything they could to manage the chaos, including stopping the villains who had attempted to take advantage of the situation. He gently kissed Izuku's forehead before leaving him in Hizashi's care to check on his other students. It appeared that Shoto and Hitoshi had not followed Aizawa's instructions, which frustrated him, but they were currently helping to control the civilians. With other heroes keeping an eye on them, Aizawa was left to check on Bakugo. Entering Bakugo's room, Aizawa noticed that a nurse was still treating him. The burns from the battle were visible, and Aizawa had witnessed the fight halfway through. The explosions had been louder and more intense than ever, and Bakugo's ears had suffered the worst, bleeding from the strain. Fortunately, his ears were accustomed to the loud noises, so the temporary deafness would only last a few hours. After confirming that Bakugo was alive and stable, Aizawa returned to his son. His thoughts drifted to Kurogiri and Oboro, a confusing situation that he vowed to resolve. For now, he needed to ensure Kurogiri remained imprisoned in Tartarus, unable to escape or use his quirk. Everything felt overwhelming. Aizawa asked Namuri, who was now with Hizashi watching over Izuku, about All Might. She informed him that All Might was alive but injured, though he would heal. Aizawa couldn't help but wonder how Kayama felt about the Kurogiri situation. Suddenly, Izuku's voice broke through his thoughts. He was awake and filled with concern, asking about All Might and whether his quirk had helped. Hizashi responded with excitement, but Aizawa gently interrupted, telling Izuku that everyone was fine and that he needed to rest. Izuku insisted he was fine, but a sudden wave of headache cut him off. Aizawa gently urged him to lie back down, reminding him of his fever. Tears welled in Izuku's eyes from the pain, and he succumbed to exhaustion, drifting back to sleep. Bakugo reflected on Aizawa's visit after he left. His quirk had indeed grown stronger, powerful enough to make his ears bleed. He realized he needed to add ear protection to his hero costume. Izuku had played a crucial role in defeating All for One with his quirk, and Bakugo wondered if that was why he had been targeted. It was reassuring to know that One for All wasn't the only counter to that villain. He sighed, feeling the pain from his burns and the overwhelming silence around him. Slowly, he drifted into a slumber, which was far from dreamless. In his dream, Bakugo found himself in a realm where only a woman and a frail man were visible. The rest appeared as shadows, looking down on him, which he found unsettling. The shadows seemed to lessen, revealing two figures who had once been lost. The woman introduced herself as Nana Shimura and gestured to the weak man beside her, explaining that he was the first holder of One for All. She expressed pride in Bakugo for wanting to help Toshinori and fight alongside him, even if it meant risking his life. The frail man, smiling softly, acknowledged Bakugo as an angry blonde but a good hero. This encouragement took Bakugo by surprise. He had always felt like he was not the right fit. Nana urged him to stay true to himself before everything faded to black. Katsuki woke up and opened his eyes, realizing he was in the hospital. It felt like a nightmare, dark and unsettling. Despite the coldness of the dream, he wasn't scared. Two figures had brought him enough positivity to elicit a small, genuine smile. It was a good dream, or could he even call it that? Though brief, the dream had consumed several hours. The sun was already rising, and he wondered how Izuku was doing. As he looked around, he noticed his grandmother and an older man sleeping near his bed. He quietly got up to avoid disturbing them and slipped out of his room. From what the nurses had mentioned, Izuku's room should be in the same hallway. As he stepped out, he glanced to the right and saw two familiar teens sitting a short distance away. Todoroki was asleep, leaning against Hitoshi, who was wide awake and engrossed in his phone. Hitoshi noticed Katsuki but remained still, not wanting to wake Todoroki. He acknowledged Katsuki with a nod and indicated the door to Izuku's room. Katsuki entered to find Hisashi sleeping and Aizawa awake. Aizawa looked at him, surprised. Had expected Katsuki to be asleep while Hisashi would be awake. Katsuki commented on Aizawa's unusual quietness, to which Aizawa responded with a simple acknowledgement. Katsuki moved closer to Izuku, who was sleeping peacefully, but his friend's face appeared flushed. Aizawa noted that Izuku had a fever, as if he could read Katsuki's thoughts. They discussed Izuku's behavior when he had been turned into a child, with Katsuki admitting he had only met Izuku when he was 4. Their conversation continued until Hisashi woke up, prompting Katsuki to return to his room to avoid any loud outbursts from his grandmother, which he found overwhelming. By 8 in the morning, Izuku woke up and called out to the first person he saw, Shoto. Hitoshi greeted him and informed him that his dad and Papa would return shortly from the cafeteria. Izuku responded cheerfully, but when he attempted to get up, Shoto gently pushed him back down, reminding him that he still had a fever. Izuku complained about his hunger, but a headache quickly followed. Hitoshi remarked that Hisashi had mentioned Izuku acted like a child when he was sick. Todoroki recalled similar instances of Izuku's behavior during fevers, noting his persistence. Hisashi entered, cheerfully announcing that they had brought food katsudon, hospital style. He apologized if it lacked flavor, while Aizawa simply greeted them and mentioned that Todoroki's father was looking for him. Todoroki shrugged off the comment, prompting an internal sigh from Aizawa. Izuku, overwhelmed by the noise, covered his head with a pillow, prompting Hisashi to apologize. Aizawa asked about Izuku's headache, and Izuku replied that it wasn't as bad as before. Hitoshi pointed out that the experiences of a headache and fever were indeed different, to which Izuku whined in agreement, sounding more childish than usual. The conversation shifted to the topic of cold soba, with Hisashi proudly claiming he had remembered Todoroki's preference, despite the mix-up in orders. Izuku then expressed his desire to go home, stating that hospitals made him feel unwell, which elicited a chuckle from Hitoshi. Todoroki reassured Izuku that he also disliked hospitals and promised to help him get out. Meanwhile, the students were given a break while the teachers managed publicity matters. With the symbol of peace having fallen and left a legacy, the teachers recognized the need for dormitories to ensure the safety of their students amid rising villain attacks. They had also arranged provisional licensing exams, allowing hero students to engage in real hero work. With those matters settled, the press had been handled effectively, parental agreements for the dorms secured, and the licensing exam scheduled, leading them to anticipate what was to come next. Izuku was puzzled as 3 familiar third-year students entered the room. Their faces lit up with excitement, mirroring his own. Mirio, Nijire, and Tamaki greeted him warmly, and he felt a surge of joy since he hadn't seen them since starting in Class 1A. Mirio called out to Izuku with a bright smile, while Tamaki leaned against the wall, looking a bit shy. Nijire, full of energy, began asking questions about the students' quirks, her enthusiasm infectious. Aizawa cleared his throat to get Nijire's attention, prompting her to step forward and introduce herself. She expressed her happiness at meeting everyone, relieved she didn't have to do this in Class 1B. Tamaki was next, though he hesitated and stuttered through his introduction. He felt nervous, thinking everyone looked like potatoes. Mirio, ever the lively one, attempted to lighten the mood with a joke, but it fell flat, creating an awkward silence. Realizing he wasn't the best at explaining things verbally, he suggested they demonstrate their quirks instead, leading Class 1A to the gym earlier than scheduled. Once in the gym, excitement filled the air. Todoroki and Bakugo faced challenges during the sparring session. Todoroki managed to encase Mirio in ice, but Mirio skillfully used his quirk to escape, surprising Todoroki from behind. Izuku, however, remained unaffected by Mirio's quirk due to his own abilities, allowing him to hold his ground. The sparring match intensified, with punches exchanged between Izuku and Bakugo. Izuku's rigorous training gave him the upper hand, leading to a swift victory. After a few minutes of action, the students took a breather while Aizawa began discussing the importance of their lessons. Suddenly, the doors swung open, revealing Vlad King leading Class 1B. The two teachers exchanged greetings, and both classes expressed curiosity about each other's presence. Aizawa explained that they would be conducting joint classes for extra training, which the students accepted with nods of understanding. Monoma, however, couldn't resist making a bold statement, claiming Class 1A would be defeated by Class 1B. His loud remarks drew responses from his classmates, and Kendo swiftly intervened, smacking both Monoma and Mineta on the head to quiet them down. As training continued, the teachers were called away for an important matter, leaving Izuku, Kendo, and Ida in charge. Cementos had arranged training areas for everyone, and Izuku took a moment to rest, closing his eyes. When he opened them again, he noticed Mineta was missing from his designated area. Concerned, Izuku set off to find him, suspecting he might be up to no good. He soon discovered Mineta inappropriately bothering Yaoyorozu. Anger surged through Izuku as he rushed forward, grabbing Mineta by the collar and leading him away from the scene. Hitoshi and Shoto exchanged worried glances, while Ida followed closely behind, concerned for both Izuku and Mineta. Izuku, fueled by frustration, threw Mineta to the ground. Ida gasped, trying to intervene, but the commotion had already drawn the attention of many students. Fortunately, Kendo was absent, as she was assisting Monoma and another student elsewhere. After a few more light punches, Mineta appeared to be in rough shape. Hitoshi voiced his concern, though he secretly believed Mineta deserved it. Others joined in, urging Izuku to stop, with even Momo expressing her worry for Mineta's well-being. Ida, in a dramatic gesture, proclaimed that Izuku couldn't just harm people, emphasizing the seriousness of the situation. The doors burst open, and Aizawa entered, ready to address the noise. Upon seeing Izuku holding Mineta, who looked worse for wear, he inquired about what had happened. Izuku explained the situation, and Aizawa, frustrated, smacked him lightly on the head, reminding him that consequences would follow. Aizawa then turned to Mineta, giving him a lighter reprimand. He firmly stated that Mineta was not one of his students, leaving the situation hanging in the air. As the training resumed, Aizawa called out instructions to Izuku and Hitoshi, encouraging them to utilize their quirks effectively. His attention then shifted to Bakugo, who was receiving guidance from All Might. He was there not only because he was training his own students but also to prevent quirk malfunctions from Bakugo. After classes had ended and their classmates had gone home, Bakugo was set to train with All Might, while Shota and Hizashi had to stay late. Hitoshi and Izuku decided to stay and do some extra training alongside Bakugo. Eraserhead was continuously giving strict instructions to the two, while All Might was being careful with Bakugo. Their contrasting teaching styles worked perfectly together. Aizawa instructed Izuku to use more force and reminded him to stay quiet during his attacks, emphasizing the importance of stealth even against Hitoshi. Just as he was about to set up for their next round, Nizu entered the room. The younger Aizawa excitedly greeted Nizu, ignoring Bakugo's annoyed sound at Izuku's unfinished explanation. Nizu cheerfully asked how Izuku was doing, to which Izuku responded with a smile. Aizawa sighed and inquired about Nizu's purpose for being there. Nizu playfully replied that he wanted to watch the training, which Aizawa found amusing given the numerous cameras already monitoring the session. Nizu then explained that he was there to review Izuku's strategizing skills, as the upcoming exams were rumored to be particularly challenging. Aizawa waved him off, stating he would focus on training Hitoshi while waiting for him to finish. After training, the family of four returned home, with Izuku feeling mentally exhausted. Aizawa commented on how Nizu had drained Izuku, glancing at his son who had fallen asleep on Hitoshi's shoulder in the back seat. Hitoshi smirked, claiming his role as the older brother, while Aizawa reminded him to rest and warned him against taking his coffee, emphasizing the importance of passing the exam. As they arrived home, Aizawa carried Izuku to bed, and Hitoshi chose to sleep in Izuku's room. Hisashi made sure to keep coffee away from Aizawa, hoping to help him get some much-needed sleep. The next morning, Hisashi's loud voice echoed through the house, waking everyone up. They hurriedly prepared for the day, with Izuku frantically searching for his gear and Hitoshi asking about his voice changer. The morning chaos left Hisashi managing 3 irresponsible individuals. After breakfast, which Hisashi had cooked, they all headed to UA. Aizawa and the boys arrived early, waiting for the first students to show up. As expected, Yaoyorozu, Ida, and Katsuki arrived on time. Izuku greeted Katsuki cheerfully, who responded with a low acknowledgement while trying to hide his excitement. Izuku also greeted the other 2 with a smile. Once all 20 students had gathered, Izuku felt a twinge of sadness at the absence of Inesa but remained hopeful about seeing him later. Hitoshi, in contrast, greeted everyone with a bored demeanor. Shoto approached Izuku and commented on his overly happy demeanor, prompting Izuku to tilt his head innocently and change the subject. They boarded the bus for a quick ride, during which Izuku shared his plans, creating a mini-meeting that kept everyone engaged. As they neared the building, they saw various buses from other schools, heightening their excitement. Upon arrival, Inesa, wearing a shiketsu uniform, greeted everyone with a respectful bow. Izuku joyfully tackled Inesa into a hug, prompting curious looks from Shoto and Hitoshi, who wondered if Izuku was acting childish or genuinely happy. Suddenly, a black-haired boy in a gray uniform called out to them, asking for an autograph, while a confident blonde girl expressed her admiration. Kaminari was amazed at their newfound fame. The black-haired boy introduced himself as Shindo, a second year from Ketsubutsu Academy, and extended his hand to Izuku. Izuku, sensing Shindo's uncertainty, shook his hand with a bright smile, leaving Shindo confused about whether Izuku's demeanor was genuine or an act. Just then, Bakugo interrupted their moment, teasing Shindo about his acting skills. Katsuki's sarcasm was unmistakable. Shindo muttered to himself, realizing he wasn't fooling anyone. Shocked by what he heard next, Izuku scolded in a hushed tone, reminding Katsuki that it was rude to criticize someone's acting. Although he whispered, everyone heard him. Shindo pondered to himself, wondering if Katsuki was actually clever or just not rude. He felt a pang of insecurity about his acting skills, thinking he needed to improve if it was that obvious. Izuku, hiding behind Hitoshi, couldn't help but chuckle at Shindo's distracted expression. Hitoshi, with a smirk on his tired face, teased Shindo about his knack for manipulating people. Izuku whistled in playful denial, insisting he had no idea what they were talking about. Their light-hearted banter was interrupted by a familiar voice that caused both of them to wear expressions of disbelief as they internally face-bombed. Hitoshi and Izuku shared a mutual thought. Not again. Izuku was now healthy and ready to begin his hero training. He felt a surge of excitement as the licensing exams were scheduled for his first year, a rarity since they typically occurred in the 3rd year before graduation. Upon entering his classroom, he was greeted with joy. His classmates were relieved to see him, some even shedding tears of happiness. The Baku squad rushed to embrace him, but Ida intervened, reminding them to behave. Izuku thanked Ida for his intervention. Inesa approached with a smile, though it seemed tinged with sadness. Izuku noticed this and inquired if something was wrong. To his surprise, Inesa suddenly hugged him tightly, revealing that he was crying. When Izuku pointed this out, Inesa insisted that they were manly tears. Kirishima chimed in from the background, claiming that was his line, only to be playfully smacked by Mina. Inesa explained that while he was overjoyed about Izuku's recovery, he was also upset because his family was moving, which meant he had to transfer schools. The revelation shocked the class, and many exclaimed in disbelief. Izuku was at a loss for words and quietly took his seat, his silence unsettling his classmates. Hitoshi entered the room a bit later, having been caught up with friends from general studies. The unusual quietness of the class struck him as odd. Upon spotting Izuku, he realized the reason for the somber atmosphere. He noted to the class that Izuku was simply upset. Inesa, looking as if he might cry, whispered to Hitoshi, asking if Izuku was angry. Hitoshi reassured him that Izuku would talk later when he felt better. Just then, the bell rang, and Aizawa entered the room, looking a bit disheveled. He was followed by Yaoyorozu, who apologized for being late, explaining that she had an encounter with some boys from Class 1B, but Kendo and Midnight had intervened. Uraraka, concerned, asked what had happened. Yaoyorozu recounted her encounter with Mineta and Minoma. Izuku, breaking his silence, asked what the perverted boy had done, his voice sending a chill through the room. Inasa panicked, recalling Hitoshi's earlier comment about Izuku being too sad to respond. Hitoshi, amused by Inasa's concern, smirked and explained that Izuku simply disliked perverts, which eased the tension in the classroom. Aizawa, now at the podium, announced that they would be moving into dorms, having already obtained parental consent. He informed them that they would begin intense training soon, leading up to the provisional licensing exams, a decision made due to the increasing villain attacks. He sighed before continuing, stating that they would be learning from the top 3 students in the school, known as the Big Three. As 3 students entered the room, Izuku's thoughts sharpened with curiosity about who they were. Chapter 5. Hitoshi and Izuku felt a wave of dread wash over them as they watched Ms. Joke approach Eraser. Izuku quickly pulled Shoto and Katsuki closer to him, making a sorrowful yet annoyed expression as he urged them not to let the exuberant woman see him. Ms. Joke, noticing Izuku's actions, thought to herself that he was just like his father. As she called out to Izuku and rushed toward him, attempting to embrace him while chattering about how he should grow up quickly and marry her, Aizawa intervened by wrapping his scarf around the green-haired woman, pulling her away from Izuku. Mina, observing the scene, remarked on the resemblance between Ms. Joke and Izuku, noting the green hair. Aizawa, looking weary, replied that he was married to present Mike. The students continued to speculate about the connection, but Aizawa shot them a glare, disapproving of the conversation. Despite the chatter, Izuku remained in good spirits, as Hitoshi and Shoto redirected his attention away from their discussion. After the meet-up, Aizawa led the students into the building, while the teachers took a different hallway. The students were guided to a square room where they encountered a man who seemed to be competing with Aizawa's fatigue. He spoke slowly and lacked detail in his instructions. Fortunately, Ida and Izuku, who were always attentive during such events, noticed the pamphlet containing the rules in the corner of the room. Izuku distributed the pamphlets to his classmates, ensuring everyone had one, as they were limited and just enough for his class. The sleepy man then announced the start of the exam. Izuku felt prepared. He had watched these events for years and had received this opportunity from Nizu and the Hero Commission for assisting with some criminal cases. With the exam underway, everyone in Class 1A revised their strategy. Izuku had meticulously planned for various opponent quirks. He, along with Todoroki, Yaoyorozu, Bakugu, and Shinso, had to be ready to split into different groups if necessary. They had informally agreed that Izuku would take the lead since he had devised the plan. In a flashback, Izuku had stood up on the bus, maintaining his balance as it moved, to share his strategy for the exams. His classmates looked at him skeptically, unsure of what the exams would entail. Izuku acknowledged their uncertainty but reassured them that he had observed enough to form a plan. He emphasized the importance of teamwork and explained that every year, other schools aimed for UA, primarily due to the sports festival. Ida raised his hand, eager to contribute, and Izuku encouraged the interaction, reinforcing the idea that their quirks would be known to everyone once they became professionals. He urged his classmates to stay confident but not overconfident, as that could lead to failure. Izuku laid out the basics of their strategy, ensuring it adhered to the exam rules. After confirming that everyone understood, Izuku sat close to Momo and others before returning to his brother. He whispered instructions to Yaoyorozu, who then created 6 pairs of communication devices for the chosen leaders. This was within the rules, as it promoted teamwork during the battle. Momo explained that all leaders would be able to hear each other, and Izuku expressed his gratitude. He reassured the rest of the class that Ida and the others would receive directions from him, promising to take responsibility if anything went wrong, though he felt confident that wouldn't happen. Izuku was determined to lead his classmates with the right mindset to succeed in this part of the exam, hoping to avoid any outbursts from Bakugu or triggers for Shoto related to his father. He had carefully guided them, knowing that their success depended on their teamwork and focus. Hitoshi adjusted his support gear and summarized their strategy, explaining that they would defend, attack quickly, and then defend until the end. He emphasized the importance of sticking together and executing their plan swiftly. Each member had 6 balls to throw, and he intended to hide and assist when necessary. He warned them not to be complacent, as they might become separated, and self-reliance would be graded by the judges. The group nodded in agreement. Katsuki raised a concern about the wind user, wondering what would happen if Inasa encountered them. Shoto pointed to the others, and Izuku simply shrugged, suggesting they adapt to the situation. He advised them to remain calm, make a plan, and execute it, reminding them that quirks have flaws. He speculated that Inasa would likely focus on finishing quickly and defending afterward, believing he would be more helpful than competitive. Before they could discuss further, an alarm rang, signaling the start of the exam. Izuku felt confident that Class 1A would prove their worth. His classmates were surprised by his sudden display of leadership. While they recognized his talent, they were curious about his newfound initiative. Despite his laid-back demeanor in class, Izuku had worked hard for this moment, and they admired his dedication. Thanks to Izuku's earlier plans, the group felt more determined and capable of handling their tasks. Momo reflected on how other students had seemingly agreed to avoid attacking each other, except for Class 1A. Izuku called out to Bakugo, who unleashed an explosion that created wind pressure, causing the ball to sway and allowing his classmates to seize some that came their way. Izuku grinned, noting that there were no rules against using others' ball to attack, though Hitoshi reminded him they still needed to eliminate their assigned ball. Izuku playfully suggested that it would be more exciting to show who was worthy. Aizawa sighed at the confident mischief Izuku displayed. Pulling Hitoshi aside, Izuku activated his hidden microphone and conveyed the importance of quality over quantity in the exams. They needed to demonstrate their strength as future heroes, especially with the looming threat of the League of Villains. Hitoshi pointed out that the situation was challenging but expressed his unwillingness to accept defeat. Izuku smiled at him, filled with determination, and reassured him that passing the exam was essential. The conviction in Izuku's eyes inspired Hitoshi, and they returned to the group just as the ground shook beneath them. They turned to see Shindo, a black-haired student who believed his acting skills were impressive, smirking as he activated his quirk to create vibrations that disrupted Class 1A's balance. As the ground trembled and a cloud of dust enveloped the arena, Aizawa grumbled about his inability to see his son. Izuku apologized for not preventing the chaos, receiving understanding responses from his classmates. He urged everyone to communicate, indicating that he would handle the trouble caused by Shindo. He muttered to himself about Shindo's lack of acting skills, which did not go unnoticed by the others. Uraraka remarked that it was clear Izuku was annoyed, hearing his voice beside Ida. Class 1A sat on the bus, visibly tired from the exam. Izuku, feeling exasperated, melted into the floor as if he were liquid. He pondered why they had to fight, repeating his question for the 30th time since the results were announced. The candy cane, unable to do anything but empathize with Izuku's sadness and frustration, sighed. All Izuku ever wanted was for everyone to pass, a sentiment he had expressed many times. Izuku reflected on why they couldn't just get along that day, even over something as trivial as whether hot or cold soba was better. When Shoto and Yoroshi agreed on something, they got along so well that it put Izuku's friendships to shame. But when they fought, it rivaled the legendary rivalry between All Might and One for All. He sighed tiredly at the thought. Turning to Katsuki, Izuku pointed at him, frustration evident. He expressed his discontent about Katsuki yelling at the people they were supposed to comfort during the rescue. Katsuki shot back, insisting that the people were annoying. Their rivalry sparked, leaving their classmates to deal with the fallout. Despite the tension, no one could blame Izuku for being upset. He had done his best to help everyone pass. Aizawa, the older mentor, finally spoke up, acknowledging Izuku's anger but assuring him that the others would do well in their extra lessons. Izuku could only pout, knowing it wasn't the right time to argue with his mentor. Aizawa suggested that Izuku follow Hitoshi's example and get some rest. With that, Hitoshi, wrapped in his yellow sleeping bag, was already asleep. Kaminari pointed out Hitoshi's sleeping bag, surprised that he had brought it along. The others noticed that Hitoshi had a purple sleeping bag as well. Kirishima pointed to a box under a chair labeled Aizawa's sleeping bag. They watched as Izuku made his way to the box and exclaimed in delight upon discovering a green sleeping bag. The tired students eventually made their way home. Todoroki was picked up by his older sister, despite his preference to stay at the dorms, while Katsuki headed home, answering a call from his mother. They were allowed to leave early, as most parents wanted to celebrate their achievements over the weekend, but they would return on Monday. Mike approached the bus to find Izuku sleeping. Hitoshi had already woken up and was handing coffee to Aizawa. Hitoshi volunteered to carry Izuku, who was still wrapped in his sleeping bag. Aizawa instructed Hitoshi to help Sho bring back papers to the office while he placed Izuku in the car. Hitoshi nodded, and Hizashi opened the car door, gently placing Izuku in the back seat. As Izuku shifted in his sleep, he mumbled a soft "Papa." Hizashi greeted him warmly, asking if he had tired himself out that day. Izuku, still half asleep, murmured about Shoto and Katsuki failing. Hizashi found it amusing that Izuku sounded so childlike, pouting as if to ask why they had failed. He encouraged Izuku to continue resting and played with his green locks. Just then, Aizawa and Hitoshi got into the car. Aizawa offered to drive, and the family of four headed home to enjoy a restful night. The weekend was spent recuperating, with even Saturday classes cancelled. When the students returned to school, they were filled with energy and excitement about their new licenses. However, Bakugo and Todoroki were not as enthusiastic and were excused from class. Mike and Aizawa remarked that they were experiencing a tough time. After school, the group decided to visit the exam site where Hizashi and Shota were. They claimed they wanted to go home together, but in truth, they were eager to witness the struggles of their mentors. Izuku observed the scene before him, small children causing trouble for those who struggled socially. He snorted in amusement before laughing, but then his expression turned serious. He questioned how this could be considered suffering. Aizawa, startled, asked what they were doing there, his tone sharp. Hitoshi pointed at Izuku, who simply shrugged. He remarked that he expected to see them in intense training, but this seemed easier than anticipated. Bakugo felt embarrassed, his face flushing with anger. He yelled that the DMN nerd wanted to see him suffer, setting off a small explosion in frustration. Present Mike added a comedic remark, further irritating Bakugo. Izuku snickered at the scene and took a picture, thinking it might come in handy for some light-hearted blackmail. Later, he imagined how Mina would react, with Toru backing her up, and Tsuyu making a blunt comment while Kaminari teased him about it. Aizawa, sitting beside Ms. Joke, warned Izuku to stop whatever he was thinking, noting that the classroom would explode if Bakugo overheated. This made Joke and the others laugh. Before sending Bakugo and Todoroki to their remedial classes, Aizawa made an announcement about the continuation of hero work. Now that they had their licenses, they wouldn't just be standing around. They could participate in fights, provided they had the consent of the hero or agency they would be interning with. He mentioned that the training would only take an hour or less and that they should learn from the three seniors who had more experience. The door opened to reveal the respected Big Three, creating a sense of déjà vu for Class 1. Aizawa explained that their strength and potential were what pros were currently seeking. He instructed Bakugo and Todoroki to stay for at least an hour to observe the training. As they were led to one of the training grounds, the students couldn't help but feel sympathy for Amajiki-senpai, who was complaining about not being able to stay home. They felt hurt to be regarded as mere spectators rather than an audience. Amajiki mumbled his thoughts, lost in his world of anxiety, while Nijire remained cheerful and motivated. Mirio, on the other hand, was the target of their collective frustration, as he had promised to go easy but ended up causing everyone to get hit, mostly in the gut. Izuku suddenly appeared in front of Aizawa, asking what was happening. Aizawa, knowing how things would likely unfold, didn't pay much attention, thinking it would be a miracle if any of his students managed to land a hit. Aside from Izuku, who could negate Mirio's permeation quirk, and Hitoshi, who had a slim chance of hypnotizing him, there was a sense of uncertainty. Izuku had confidence in his classmates and would be thrilled if a miracle occurred, but Mirio had significantly improved since joining his work studies with a certain hero. This hero might have his own feelings about Bakugo possessing one for all. Aizawa thought to himself that he needed to keep an eye on the situation, knowing that All Might would likely allow Mirio to participate. In the present moment, Izuku was teasing Mirio by lying on the floor, pretending to sleep. Aizawa sighed, aware that Mirio couldn't fight effectively without his quirk, as his training relied heavily on quick analysis, prediction, and surprise attacks. Meanwhile, Izuku seemed content to be lazy, taking advantage of his quirk's nature. Aizawa declared that the current situation couldn't continue, capturing everyone's attention. Kirishima, with a hint of nervousness, agreed with Aizawa. The black-haired teacher rummaged through his utility belt, retrieving what he needed. Izuku wished he could slip away from his father's watchful gaze and hide behind one of the teachers who might sympathize with him and support his request to avoid his father's scrutiny for a while. Izuku had no desire to face a confrontation, especially since he was enjoying his moment of rest. There was no actual fight happening, just the activation of his quirk. Mirio remained on high alert, unsure if Izuku was genuinely asleep on the training grounds. Aizawa's capture gear had effectively restrained Izuku, leaving him with no way to escape. Pulling his son closer, Aizawa reprimanded him for trying to evade his authority. He expressed his frustration, emphasizing that Izuku would not escape him this time. Izuku protested, claiming that he had successfully evaded capture 13 times, which only drew sympathetic glances from his classmates. As the struggling teen stood before Aizawa, the teacher placed the quirk-canceling bracelets on his wrists, causing Izuku to feel a wave of despair. Aizawa instructed Mirio to train Izuku, allowing him to use his quirk while Izuku would fight without his own. He reassured everyone that it was merely training, but the class couldn't help but feel anxious about the situation. Izuku whined about not wanting to be beaten up, earning a stern look from Aizawa and a cheerful grin from Mirio, who promised to go easy on him since he was still a first-year student. The classmates murmured among themselves, expressing their concern for Izuku. Some questioned whether Aizawa's approach was too harsh, while others acknowledged that it was valuable training. Aizawa explained that learning to notice opponents' habits and patterns was crucial for success in battle, emphasizing the importance of strategy to avoid unnecessary harm. Izuku contemplated Aizawa's words, feeling a sense of familiarity with the situation but unable to pinpoint why. Aizawa, sensing Izuku's distraction, urged him to stay alert, warning him that Mirio would take advantage of any lapse in focus. As if on cue, Mirio appeared before Izuku, catching him off guard. Seizing the opportunity, Izuku instinctively punched Mirio in the stomach, proving Aizawa's point about the need for vigilance. Aizawa turned to the rest of the class, reminding them that training wouldn't be effective if they merely stood by and watched. Ectoplasm arrived just in time to oversee the training session. Aizawa instructed everyone to pair up and spar, ensuring that Izuku remained engaged and didn't shy away from the challenge. With that, another day began in UA's Class 1A, filled with opportunities for growth and learning. Izuku expressed his gratitude to Ida for leading the others and commended Yaoyorozu for outsmarting Psycho and Telly, reminding everyone that overconfidence could lead to mistakes. The members of Class 1A had all passed, although Shindo had managed to evade Izuku, which left Izuku feeling somewhat annoyed. Inasa waved enthusiastically at Aizawa, who was accompanied by a girl from Shiketsu who seemed quite fond of him, along with a rather hairy individual. Bakugo appeared to have a strong dislike for the other student who had the ability to turn people into meatballs. Fortunately for Izuku, he was immune to that particular quirk. Katsuki stood off to the side, trying his best to avoid any interaction with Izuku, insisting that he was very angry, though his demeanor suggested otherwise. Izuku greeted Yoroshi with a smile, expressing his determination for the next phase. Hitoshi, while rummaging through his utility belt, commented that Izuku looked good in his uniform. After a moment, he found what he was looking for and quietly acknowledged it, but only. Izuku and Inasa seemed to notice. Izuku's surprise was evident when he saw Hitoshi with a packet of powdered coffee, leading him to exclaim in envy. He watched as Hitoshi opened the packet and took some of the powder, prompting laughter from Inasa at Izuku's jealousy. Shindo and Kami remarked on how intimidating Izuku had been earlier, to which he responded with a confused tilt of his head, appearing innocent and causing them to question their impressions. Inasa whispered to Kami that Izuku was the baby of the group, urging her not to reveal that he had said it. Kami thought to herself that earlier, she had wanted to confront Izuku but had been too intimidated by his confident demeanor. Now, she felt a desire to hug him instead. She asked Inasa if that was normal, but her gesture was playfully dismissed. Izuku pointed out that it was rude to point and confirmed that it was indeed normal behavior. He noted that Yoroshi wasn't very good at whispering, and the rest of Class 1A nodded in agreement. He suggested they work together in the next round and advised Yoroshi to avoid arguments with Shoto. Shoto, in his usual monotone, remarked that they often disagreed on many things. Meanwhile, Kami was enthusiastically praising Shoto's looks, which prompted Bakugo to scoff, declaring him unattractive. Kami countered by cheering that UA boys were handsome, which earned a chorus of agreement from the students behind her. Shindo felt embarrassed by the situation with Tatami, while Izuku continued to eye Shindo with annoyance, reminding himself that Shindo was older and deserving of respect. He found it hard to believe that Shindo was a third-year student, as he had assumed he was a first-year. Izuku muttered to himself that he was being petty,